My son pushed me into the Christmas table. He shoved me so hard that I fell backward into the wine cabinet, shattering 3 bottles of expensive vintage red. He did it in front of his wife, his children, and his wealthy father-in-law. And the reason? Because I tried to sit at the head of the table, the seat that had been mine for 40 years. "Get out!" he screamed, his face twisted with a rage I had never seen before. "This seat is for Robert. He is a VIP. You go sit in the kitchen with the kids." I lay there on the floor, soaked in wine that looked disturbingly like blood, listening to my daughter-in-law laugh. I stood up, walked out into the snow, and didn't look back. But what Marcus didn't know was that the mansion he was standing in the car in his driveway and the company credit card in his wallet were all tied to a single signature. Mine. By the time the sun rose the next morning, he would have 60 missed calls on his phone, and his life would be unrecognizable. I am Winston Carter, 74 years old, and for the last decade, I have made the mistake of loving my son too much. I thought providing him with everything I never had was the ultimate act of fatherhood. I was wrong. I was born in a 2-room shack in Alabama, the son of a sharecropper. I built Carter Logistics from a single rusted delivery truck into a multi-million-dollar empire. My hands are calloused. My skin is dark like the fertile soil of the South. And my heart, until last night, was full of pride for the boy I raised. Marcus. He was my prince. I sent him to the best private schools, the Ivy League colleges, where he was the only black kid in the rowing club. I wanted him to fit in. I wanted him to never feel the cold sting of poverty that I felt every day of my youth. But somewhere along the way, Marcus stopped seeing me as his father and started seeing me as an embarrassment. It started slowly. First, it was the way he corrected my grammar in front of his friends. Then it was how he stopped inviting me to corporate events because my presence was too imposing, too old school. And then he met Tiffany Sterling, a woman who looked at me not as a person but as a stain on her perfect white carpet. She came from old money, or so she claimed. Her father, Robert Sterling, was a real estate mogul with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. When Marcus married Tiffany, I gave them the world, literally. I signed over the deed to my 7-bedroom estate in the suburbs of Chicago as a wedding gift. I moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment downtown, telling myself that a widower didn't need so much space. I handed Marcus the CEO position of my company, keeping only a silent advisory role. I wanted to rest. I wanted to see him fly. I didn't know I was handing a loaded gun to someone who couldn't wait to pull the trigger. It was Christmas Eve. The snow was falling heavily over Chicago, blanketing the city in white. I drove my old Ford pickup truck up the long, winding driveway of the estate. The house looked magnificent, lights draped over every tree, a golden wreath on the massive oak door. I felt a swell of nostalgia. I remembered when I bought this land. I remembered carrying Marcus on my shoulders through the framing of the house before the drywall was even up. This place was built on my sweat. I parked my truck off to the side, knowing Tiffany hated seeing it next to her Range Rover and Robert's Porsche. I grabbed the gifts from the passenger seat. For my grandchildren, I had bought savings bonds and handmade wooden toys, the kind that last forever. For Marcus, I had a vintage watch that belonged to my grandfather. I brushed the snow off my coat and rang the bell. The door was opened by a catering staff member I didn't recognize. Inside, the house smelled of pine needles and expensive perfume. The foyer was filled with guests, mostly Tiffany's friends and Robert's business associates. They held crystal flutes of champagne, chattering about ski trips to Aspen and summer homes in the Hamptons. When I walked in, the conversation didn't stop, but the energy shifted. Eyes darted toward me and then quickly away. I was the elephant in the room, the old black man in the outdated suit standing in the marble hallway of a house he paid for. Tiffany glided over. She was wearing a silver dress that probably cost more than my first car. "Oh, Winston," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You made it. We weren't sure if the roads would be too much for your vehicle." She didn't offer to take my coat. She didn't hug me. She just gestured vaguely toward the living room. "Put the gifts under the tree in the corner, the back corner. We need the front for the photo shoot later." I swallowed my pride. It's Christmas, I told myself. Do it for Marcus. I did as I was told. I saw Marcus across the room laughing at a joke Robert was telling. Robert sat in my favorite leather armchair, a cigar in one hand, a glass of scotch in the other. He looked like the king of the castle. Marcus looked up and saw me. His smile faltered for a second, replaced by a look of anxiety. He gave me a quick, tight nod and turned back to Robert. Dinner was announced. We moved into the dining room. The table was a masterpiece of china and silver. There were 20 seats. I looked for my place card. Usually in every family gathering since Marcus was born, I sat at the head of the table. It wasn't about ego. It was tradition. The father, the provider, sits at the head. It was a sign of respect. I walked toward the head of the table. The chair was high-backed, upholstered in velvet. I reached out to pull it back. Suddenly, a hand clamped onto my wrist. I looked up. It was Marcus. His grip was tight, painful. His eyes were wide with panic and anger. "What do you think you are doing, Dad?" He hissed, his voice low but cutting through the ambient noise of the room. I looked at him confused. "I am sitting down for dinner, son. This is my seat." "No," Marcus said louder this time. The room went quiet. The clinking of silverware stopped. 20 pairs of eyes fixed on us. "That is not your seat. Not tonight." I tried to pull my arm away, but he held on. "Then where am I sitting?" I asked, my voice calm, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Marcus pointed to the far end of the room, past the main table, to a small folding card table set up near the swinging door to the kitchen. "The kids' table." "You are sitting there," Marcus said. "We have important guests tonight. Robert needs to sit here. He is the guest of honor. He is a VIP investor, Dad. We are closing a deal tonight. I need him to feel respected." I looked at Robert. He was standing a few feet away, watching this spectacle with a smirk playing on his lips. He didn't offer to move. He didn't say, "Oh no, please, Mr. Carter, take your seat." He just waited to claim his throne. I looked back at my son, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the boy I held when he cried over his first heartbreak, the boy I gave a company to. "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I paid for this table. I paid for the chair you are standing next to. I paid for the food we are about to eat. I am your father. I am not sitting at the kids' table." I tried to step around him to sit down. That was when it happened. Marcus didn't just block me. He shoved me. He placed both hands on my chest and pushed with all his strength. "Get out!" he screamed. The force took me by surprise. I am 74 years old. I am strong, but my balance isn't what it used to be. I stumbled backward. My feet tangled in the thick Persian rug. I flailed my arms, trying to catch myself, but there was nothing to grab. I crashed into the mahogany wine cabinet behind me. The glass doors shattered. 3 bottles of red wine exploded on impact. I hit the floor hard, the wind knocked out of me. Cold wine soaked through the back of my suit instantly. Shards of glass littered the floor around my head. The room was dead silent. I lay there for a moment, stunned. My hip throbbed with a sharp, hot pain. I looked up. Marcus stood over me, his chest heaving. For a second I saw a flash of regret in his eyes, but it was quickly washed away by the humiliation of the moment. He couldn't look weak in front of Robert. Tiffany broke the silence. She let out a cruel, high-pitched laugh. "Oh my God," she said, clutching her pearls. "Marcus is right. Look at you. You are a mess. You are ruining the carpet. You are embarrassing us in front of Daddy." She turned to the guests, flashing a bright fake smile. "I am so sorry, everyone. My father-in-law has been having spells lately." He gets confused. Robert stepped forward, stepping over a puddle of wine near my leg. He sat down in the chair at the head of the table, the chair I was supposed to be in. He picked up a napkin and calmly placed it on his lap. "Well," Robert boomed, his voice authoritative, "let's not let a little spill ruin Christmas. Marcus, sit down. Let the staff clean him up." Marcus looked at me one last time. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't ask if I was hurt. He turned his back on me and sat down next to Robert. "Get him a towel," Marcus muttered to the catering staff. "And then maybe call him a cab. He should go home." I slowly pushed myself up. My hand was bleeding from a small cut where a piece of glass had grazed my palm. My suit was ruined. But my mind was clearer than it had been in 10 years. The fog of paternal love had lifted. I saw them clearly now, not as my family, but as parasites. I refused the towel the waiter offered. I stood up straight, ignoring the pain in my hip. I brushed a shard of glass off my shoulder. I looked at the table. They were already reaching for the bread rolls, trying to pretend I wasn't there. "Marcus," I said. He didn't look up. "Just go, Dad. Please." I looked at Tiffany. She was whispering something to Robert, giggling. I looked at Robert sitting in my seat, drinking my wine. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I simply buttoned my wine-stained jacket. "Very well," I said. My voice was low, deep, the voice that had commanded union meetings and boardroom negotiations for 40 years. "Merry Christmas, everyone. Enjoy the meal. It will be the last one you enjoy in this house." They didn't hear the threat. They only heard an old man accepting defeat. Tiffany rolled her eyes. "Bye, Winston." I turned and walked to the door. The cold air of the hallway hit me. I opened the heavy oak door and stepped out into the blizzard. The wind bit at my face, freezing the tears I refused to let fall. I climbed into my truck. The engine roared to life, a rough, reliable sound. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I looked at the house one last time. Through the large bay window, I could see them toasting. Marcus was raising a glass to Robert. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't call a cab. I didn't call a doctor. I scrolled down to a number I hadn't used in a long time. It was Darnell, my godson, and the most ruthless corporate attorney in Chicago. It was Christmas Eve, but I knew he would answer. I hit dial. The game was over. The war had just begun. And as I drove away, leaving the warmth of the life I built behind me, I felt a strange sense of peace. They wanted the head of the table, fine. But they forgot one thing. I own the table. I own the house. I own the very ground they are sitting on. And tomorrow I am going to pull it all out from under them. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of white snow and red taillights. My old Ford F-150 rattled as it fought against the blizzard, the heater humming a loud, rhythmic complaint that usually annoyed me. Tonight I welcomed the noise. It drowned out the sound of my daughter-in-law's laughter echoing in my head. It drowned out the sound of my own heart breaking. My hip throbbed with a dull, heavy ache where I had hit the wine cabinet, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the hollow sensation in my chest. It felt as if someone had reached inside and scooped out everything I had lived for. I gripped the steering wheel with hands that had steered 18-wheelers through hurricanes and navigated billion-dollar mergers. But tonight they trembled. Not from the cold, but from a rage so deep it felt like magma cooling into stone. I looked at the passenger seat. The leather was cracked and worn just like me. On it lay the vintage watch I had wrapped for Marcus. It was a Patek Philippe from 1955, the year his grandfather finally paid off the mortgage on our first family home. I had saved it for a special occasion. I thought tonight was special. I thought family meant something. As I drove past the iron gates of the gated communities and into the city, the scenery changed. The mansions disappeared, replaced by high-rise condos and flashing neon signs. I lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment near the old rail yards. It was clean, it was quiet, and it was lonely. When I moved out of the estate 5 years ago, I told everyone it was because the house was too big for one man. That was a lie. I moved out because Tiffany said my furniture didn't match her aesthetic. She said my presence made her nervous. She said she needed space to nest. So like a fool, I gave her the nest. I gave her the branch. I gave her the whole damn tree. I parked the truck in the underground garage, the silence of the concrete bunker amplifying my solitude. I took the elevator up to the 12th floor, limping slightly. When I unlocked my door, the apartment was dark. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked straight to the window and looked out at the city of Chicago. The snow was covering the grime of the streets, making everything look pure and clean. It was an illusion, just like my life. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of bourbon. Cheap stuff, not the single malt scotch Robert was undoubtedly sipping right now in my chair. I sat down on my sofa and stared at the phone on the coffee table. It sat there like a loaded weapon. I knew he would text. Marcus was a coward, and cowards always text because they can't handle the sound of a voice they've betrayed. 10 minutes later, the screen lit up. One new message from Marcus. I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me, the pathetic, fatherly part of me, hoped for an apology. I hoped to read, "Dad, I am so sorry. I lost my mind. Please come back. I will kick Robert out." I opened the message. "Dad, please don't be dramatic about tonight. You know how important this deal with Robert is for the company." I had to flatter him. He is old school. He needs to feel like the patriarch to sign the check. You taking the fall was necessary collateral. Bumping you to the kid's table isn't a death sentence. You have to understand business requires cool off and we can grab lunch next week. Don't ruin this for me. I read it twice, then a third time. Business requires sacrifice. The audacity of those words almost made me laugh. Sacrifice. He was lecturing me about sacrifice. My mind flashed back to a rainy Tuesday 5 years ago. We were in my lawyer's office. Marcus was sweating in his suit, terrified that Tiffany would call off the wedding. She had told him she couldn't marry a man who was just a VP. She needed a CEO. She needed a man who owned the empire, not just the heir to it. I sat across from him that day. I looked at my son, desperate for validation from a woman who only loved his title. And I made the biggest sacrifice of my life. I signed the transfer papers. I sold Carter Logistics, a company valued at $40 million, to Marcus Carter for the sum of $1. I remember the look on his face. Relief. Not gratitude, but relief. He didn't say thank you for the 40 years of sweat I put into those trucks. He didn't thank me for the missed birthdays because I was driving cross-country to keep the lights on. He just signed the paper, smiled, and said, "Tiffany is going to be so happy." I bought his happiness for $1, and tonight he sold my dignity for a seat at a dinner table. I took a sip of the bourbon. It burned going down, waking me up. He thought I was retired. He thought I was just an old man collecting a pension, watching TV, and waiting to die. He thought the transfer of ownership was absolute, but Marcus was never good at reading the fine print. He was always the visionary, never the details man. That was why I always handled the contracts. And on that day 5 years ago, I had added a clause, a safety net, a nuclear option. I called it the Omega Protocol. It was hidden on page 42 of the transfer agreement under the section labeled Beneficiary Conduct and Moral Turpitude. It stated that while Marcus held the title of CEO and the public shares, the Class B voting shares, the shares that actually controlled the assets, the bank accounts, and the liquidity remained in a blind trust. And the sole trustee of that trust was Winston Carter. The clause was simple. If the beneficiary acts in a way that brings disrepute, harm, or gross disrespect to the founder, the trust has the unilateral right to revoke all executive privileges, freeze all assets, and liquidate personal property tied to company credit lines immediately. I never thought I would use it. I put it there as a formality, a habit of a man who never drives without a spare tire. I looked at the text message again. Business requires sacrifice. Fine, Marcus. You want a lesson in business, I'll give you a master class. I put the glass down. The trembling in my hands had stopped completely. I felt cold, calculating, and dangerously calm. I dialed Darnell. He picked up on the second ring. I could hear jazz music in the background. He was probably at a Christmas party, surrounded by warmth and laughter. "Hello, Uncle Winston. Is everything okay?" His voice was concerned. He knew I wouldn't call on Christmas Eve unless someone was dead or dying. "Darnell," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It sounded like gravel grinding against steel. "I need you to go to the office. Now." The music in the background stopped. He must have stepped into a quiet room. "Uncle Winston, it's 10 p.m. on Christmas Eve. What's going on? I want you to open the safe. I want you to pull the Carter Logistics transfer agreement dated August 12, 2019. There was a pause. A long, heavy silence. Darnell was smart. He knew exactly what that document was. "The Omega Protocol," he whispered. "Yes," I said. "Uncle Winston, wait. Take a breath." "Do you know what that does?" Darnell's voice rose in pitch. "That's the nuclear button. It doesn't just fire him. It strips him. It freezes the corporate accounts, the payroll access, the company cars. It recalls the loans on the estate. The house is under the company umbrella Winston. If you do this, you are effectively evicting him. You are bankrupting him." "I know," I said. Why, Darnell asked. Did he crash the company? Did he embezzle money? "No," I said, looking out at the snow falling on the city that I helped build. "He did something worse." I told Darnell what happened. I told him about the table. I told him about the push. I told him about Robert sitting in my chair while my son watched me bleed on the carpet. When I finished, there was silence on the other end of the line. "He pushed you?" Darnell asked, his voice low. "Physically?" "Yes. And then he sent me a text telling me to stop being dramatic because he needs to impress his father-in-law." I heard the sound of keys jingling on the other end. I heard a car door open. "I'm on my way to the office," Darnell said. His tone had changed. The hesitation was gone. It was replaced by the cold efficiency of a prosecutor. Good, I said. But Uncle Winston Darnell added one last check. Once I file this injunction digitally, the banks will trigger the freeze at midnight. By tomorrow morning, his credit cards will be plastic scrap. His access to the building will be revoked. The repo teams will be notified about the cars. This is total war. There is no coming back from this. Are you absolutely sure? I looked at the empty apartment. I looked at the bruise forming on my hip. I looked at the text message one last time. Business requires sacrifice. He pushed me, Darnell, I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet loud enough to bring down an empire. He pushed me down to the floor. Now I am going to push him out of my life. Execute it. I hung up the phone. I walked back to the window. Somewhere in the suburbs, in a house that I paid for, Marcus was probably raising a glass of champagne, thinking he had secured his future. He was probably laughing with Tiffany, feeling powerful, feeling like a king. Sleep tight, my son, I whispered to the cold glass. Because when you wake up, the castle will be gone. The city of Chicago sleeps at 2 a.m, but the law offices of Darnell and Associates were wide awake. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low clinical buzz that felt harsh against my tired eyes. I sat in a leather chair that cost more than the truck I drove to get here, staring at a mahogany conference table covered in files. My hip was still throbbing, a rhythmic reminder of the humiliation I had suffered just hours before. Every time I shifted my weight, the pain shot up my spine, fueling the fire that was burning in my gut. Darnell sat across from me, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up, looking at a computer screen with an expression of pure disbelief. He had been my godson for 30 years and my attorney for 10, but tonight he looked at me as if I were a stranger. He clicked a mouse, scrolling through pages of digital contracts. Uncle Winston, he said, his voice cutting through the silence. I am looking at the corporate structure of Carter Logistics. I thought I knew this company inside and out, but this, I didn't know about the Class B shares. How did you keep this hidden? I took a sip of the lukewarm water he had poured for me. I didn't hide it, Darnell. I just didn't advertise it. When I stepped down as CEO, everyone focused on the title transfer. Marcus got the corner office. He got the magazine covers. He got the public glory. But I kept the voting rights. 51%. Darnell shook his head, a mixture of shock and admiration on his face. So technically Marcus is an employee, a very highly paid employee with a fancy title, but he serves at the pleasure of the majority shareholder. Which is you. Exactly, I said. And tonight the majority shareholder is not pleased. Darnell typed something on his keyboard. Okay, if we execute the Omega Protocol, we are effectively firing the CEO for cause. The cause being moral turpitude and actions detrimental to the founder. That allows us to bypass the severance package. He gets nothing. No golden parachute, no stock options. He walks away with the clothes on his back. Not just the clothes, I corrected him. Pull up the personal expense accounts. Darnell switched tabs. His eyes widened. Jesus. The corporate credit cards, the black Amex, the platinum Visa. The spending here is aggressive. Read it to me, I said. I needed to hear it. I needed to know exactly what my hard-earned money was buying while I was being pushed to the floor. Darnell adjusted his glasses. In the last month alone, $12,000 at Saks Fifth Avenue, $5,000 at a Michelin-star sushi restaurant, $8,000 for a weekend rental in Aspen, and... wait, he looked closer at the screen. There is a $50,000 charge from yesterday, top-tier catering and events. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. That was the party, I said. The party where I was told to sit at the kids' table. I paid $50,000 to be humiliated in my own house. Technically, Darnell said softly, it's not their house either. I am looking at the deed transfer you signed over for the wedding gift. It wasn't a direct gift, was it? No, I said. I leaned forward, the pain in my hip flaring again. I wasn't going to hand over a $3 million estate to a woman I barely knew. It was structured as a forgivable private loan. The company holds the mortgage. As long as Marcus remains the CEO in good standing, the loan payments are forgiven each month. It's a perk of the job. But if he is no longer the CEO... Darnell let the sentence hang in the air. Then the loan is called due. I finished. Immediately. The full principal amount. $3 million. Payable within 30 days or the property is foreclosed and seized by the company. Darnell took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Uncle Winston, do you realize what you are doing? You aren't just cutting him off. You are dismantling his entire existence. Marcus has no savings. I handle his taxes. He lives paycheck to paycheck even with a $500,000 salary. Tiffany spends it faster than he earns it. If you do this by tomorrow morning, they will be destitute. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Below us, the city lights twinkled like diamonds. It looked peaceful. It looked deceptive. Darnell, I said, not turning around. Do you remember when Marcus was 10 years old? He wanted a bicycle, a specific red BMX bike. It was expensive. I made him work for it. He swept the warehouse floors for 3 months. When he finally bought that bike, he treated it like gold. He polished it every day. He locked it up tight, because he earned it. I turned back to face Darnell. Somewhere along the way, I stopped making him sweep the floors. I just gave him the bike, and the cars, and the house, and because he didn't earn any of it, he doesn't respect any of it. And he certainly doesn't respect the man who gave it to him. Tonight, he didn't see a father. He saw an ATM machine that had outlived its usefulness. He pushed me, Darnell. He put his hands on my chest and shoved me down to make room for a man who has never given him a dime. I walked back to the table and placed my hand on the stack of files. I am not doing this to destroy him. I am doing this to save him. He needs to know what the cold wind feels like. He needs to know what it feels like to fall down and have no one to pick him up, because that is the only way he will ever become a man. Darnell looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. He understood. He reached for the digital signature pad. "Ready?" he asked. I picked up the stylus. My hand was steady now. "First the accounts," I said. "Freeze them, all of them. The black Amex, the checking account linked to the company payroll. Flag them for internal audit regarding embezzlement." Darnell typed rapidly. "Done. The freeze will propagate through the banking system in about 10 minutes. The next time they try to swipe a card, it will be declined." Next, the assets, I continued. The cars, the Range Rover Tiffany drives, the Porsche Marcus drives. They are company leases, correct? "Correct," Darnell said. "Report them as stolen," I said. Darnell paused. "Stolen. That's harsh, Winston. They have the keys." "They have keys to company vehicles that they are no longer authorized to operate," I said coldly. "If they are not returned to the company garage by 9 a.m., they are stolen property. Trigger the GPS remote disable. I want those engines dead in the water." "Done," Darnell whispered. And finally I said, looking at the document that would hurt the most. "The house. Issue the notice of default." I ordered, "Send a courier to the mansion at 8 a.m. sharp. I want it served while they are having their morning coffee. Tell them they have 30 days to pay $3 million or vacate the premises." Darnell hit the final key. The printer in the corner whirred to life, spitting out the legal notices that would end my son's life as he knew it. It was a mechanical sound, rhythmic and final. I checked my watch. It was 2:45 in the morning. "It's done," Darnell said. He looked exhausted. "You should go home and get some sleep, Uncle Winston." I picked up my phone. It was still silent. No more texts. No calls. They were probably asleep, warm in their king-size beds, dreaming of the money Robert was going to bring them. Dreaming of the empire they thought they ruled. I powered the phone down. I watched the screen go black. "I am not going home," I said, putting on my coat. "I am going to a diner. I am going to have a cup of coffee and wait for the sun to come up." I walked to the door, then stopped. "You asked me if I was sure, Darnell." He looked up. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life. You see, money is a loud thing. It screams for attention. It buys friends. It buys respect. It buys seats at the head of the table. But poverty is quiet. It forces you to listen." I opened the door. Let's see what Marcus hears when the silence sets in. Let's see how much love is left in that house when there is no money left to fund their egos. I stepped out into the hallway. The elevator arrived with a soft ding. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, sealing me off from the legal battlefield I had just commanded, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a deep, aching sorrow. But beneath the sorrow there was steel. The lesson had begun. The sun rose over Chicago with a brilliance that felt almost mocking. It was Christmas morning. The world outside was covered in a pristine blanket of white snow reflecting the sunlight in blinding glimmers. Inside my small apartment, the air smelled of Folgers coffee brewing in an old drip machine. It was a humble smell, one that reminded me of the mornings before the millions, before the mansions, and before the betrayal. I sat at my small kitchen table wearing my flannel robe and took a sip from a chipped mug that said "World's Best Dad." I looked at the mug for a long time, tracing the faded letters with my thumb. Then, with a heavy sigh, I pushed it aside. The irony was too bitter even for black coffee. My phone sat on the table next to the sugar bowl. It had been vibrating incessantly since 7 a.m., dancing across the wood like a nervous beetle. I hadn't turned the ringer on. I didn't need to hear the noise to know what panic sounded like. I picked it up and tapped the screen. The notifications cascaded down like a waterfall of desperation. 60 missed calls, 45 from Marcus, 15 from Tiffany, and a barrage of text messages that evolved from confusion to anger to pure, unadulterated vitriol. I opened the first text from Tiffany, sent at 9:15 a.m. It read, "The card isn't working. Fix it. We are with Daddy." The second text, sent at 9:20 a.m. "Marcus is trying the visa. It's declined too. Winston, pick up the phone. You are embarrassing us." The last text, sent 10 minutes ago, was just a string of expletives followed by, "You are a senile, vindictive old man." I placed the phone face down. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel the sadistic pleasure of revenge that they show in movies. I felt a deep, hollow ache in my chest. But alongside the ache was clarity. I closed my eyes and I could see the scene playing out across town as clearly as if I were sitting at the table next to them. I knew exactly where they were. The Golden Fork. It was Robert's favorite brunch spot, the kind of place where an omelet cost $30 and the waiters wore white gloves. They would have walked in with their heads held high, projecting the image of the perfect power couple. Marcus in his Italian suit, Tiffany dripping in diamonds that I had essentially paid for, and Robert, the guest of honor, soaking up the attention. They would have ordered the most expensive items on the menu: lobster Benedict, truffle shavings, bottles of Cristal champagne to toast the big deal Robert was supposedly bringing to the table. Marcus would have been laughing loud and confident, thinking his nightmare ended when he kicked me out the night before. He thought he had won. He thought the seat at the head of the table was secured. Then came the bill. I imagined the waiter placing the leather folder on the table. Marcus would have reached for it casually, barely looking at the total, pulling out the black Amex issued by Carter Logistics. He would have handed it over with a dismissive wave. "Keep the change," he would have said. The waiter would have walked away. 5 minutes would pass, then 10. The conversation at the table would have started to stall. Robert would have checked his watch. Tiffany would have started tapping her manicured nails on the tablecloth. Then the waiter would return. Not with a receipt, but with the card held between two fingers like a contaminated object. "I'm sorry, sir," he would whisper, leaning in so as not to cause a scene. The card was declined. Marcus would have laughed. "That's impossible," he would say. "There is no limit on that card. Run it again." The waiter would shake his head. "We ran it 3 times, sir. The bank has flagged it. Do you have another form of payment?" The sweat would have started then, a cold, prickly sweat breaking out on Marcus's forehead. He would fumble for his wallet, the Platinum Visa, the corporate MasterCard. He would hand them over, his hands shaking slightly. "Try these," he would stammer. "Just a glitch." But Darnell had been thorough. The Omega Protocol wasn't a scalpel. It was a sledgehammer. Every account linked to my social security number or the company trust had been frozen. I imagined the waiter coming back a second time, the look of pity in his eyes. Declined, declined, and declined. The silence at the table would have been deafening. The other diners would have started to stare. The illusion of wealth, the facade of the successful CEO, would have shattered right there amidst the smell of bacon and old money. And then, the ultimate humiliation. Robert Sterling, the man Marcus had pushed his own father down to impress, would have sighed, a long, disappointed sigh. He would have reached into his pocket and pulled out his own wallet. "I'll get it, Marcus," he would say, his voice dripping with condescension. "We can't have the police called on Christmas, can we?" That moment, that specific moment where Marcus had to watch his father-in-law pay for his breakfast because he couldn't access a dime of the fortune he didn't earn. That was the moment I needed him to feel. My reverie was broken by a sound that made my heart jump. Boom, boom, boom. Someone was pounding on my front door. It wasn't a knock, it was an assault. The wood groaned under the force of the blows. Open up. Open the door. Winston. It was Marcus. He was here. I didn't rush. I took another sip of my coffee. I stood up slowly, tightening the belt of my robe. I walked to the mirror in the hallway and looked at myself. I saw a man who was tired. I saw a man who was grieving the loss of his son while his son was still alive. But I also saw the man who had built a dynasty from dirt. I straightened my back. The pounding continued. I know you're in there. Open this door before I break it down. I walked to the door and unlocked the deadbolt. I turned the handle and pulled it open. Marcus stood there, chest heaving. He looked like a wild animal. His expensive suit was rumpled, his tie crooked. His face was a mask of red fury. Behind him down the hallway I could see two of my neighbors peeking out of their doors, terrified. "You crazy old man!" Marcus screamed, pushing past me into the apartment. "What the hell is wrong with you? What did you do?" He paced around my small living room, kicking at the leg of my sofa. I tried to buy gas on the way here and my card was declined. I had to use the cash in my glove box like a pauper. We were at the Golden Fork, Dad with Robert. Do you have any idea how humiliated I was? They cut my cards. They said the accounts were frozen for fraud. He spun around and pointed a finger in my face, the same finger he had used to point me to the kids' table. Fix it. Call the bank right now and tell them it's a mistake. Tell them you're senile. Tell them you pressed the wrong button. I don't care what you tell them, just unfreeze my money. I closed the door gently. I wanted the neighbors to hear, but I didn't want them to see. I walked over to the small desk where I kept my bills. On top of the stack was a single sheet of paper. Darnell had printed it out for me at the office last night. It was standard A4 paper, thin and fragile, but the words printed on it carried the weight of a guillotine blade. I picked it up. I turned to face my son. He was still shouting, his voice cracking with desperation. "Tiffany is in the car crying. She says she's leaving me if I don't fix this. This is financial abuse. I'm the CEO of Carter Logistics. You can't do this to me." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't match his anger. I went quiet. The kind of quiet that happens before a tornado touches down. "Sit down, Marcus." "I'm not sitting down in this dump," he spat. "Sit down." The command came from deep in my chest. It was the voice I used when he was 12 and caught stealing candy. It was the voice of the father, and instinctively his body obeyed. He collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. "Why are you doing this?" he moaned. "Just because of the table." "It was just a seat, Dad. It was just a chair." I walked over and stood in front of him. I looked down at the top of his head. I remembered the day he was born. I remembered promising him the world. I had kept that promise, and he had thrown it back in my face. "It wasn't just a chair, Marcus," I said softly. "It was my place in this family. It was my dignity. And you sold it for a chance to impress a man who doesn't care if you live or die." I held out the paper. "Take this." He looked up, his eyes red and swollen. "What is it? Is it the authorization to unfreeze the accounts?" "Take it." He snatched the paper from my hand. He scanned the lines quickly, his brow furrowed. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "Termination," he whispered. "What is this?" "Read the second paragraph," I said. He read it aloud, his voice trembling. "Termination for cause. Pursuant to the Omega Protocol, immediately effective. Allegations of embezzlement." He looked up at me, pure shock replacing the anger. "Embezzlement? Are you insane? I never stole a dime. I ran that company. I made us millions. You spent company funds on a personal lifestyle that you could not afford." I said, my voice steady. "The cars leased by the company, the house mortgaged by the company, the credit cards you used to buy Tiffany her diamonds paid by the company. As long as you were the CEO, those were perks. But you are no longer the CEO. I can't be fired. I own the company. You gave it to me. I gave you the title. I corrected him. I kept the control. I kept 51% of the voting shares. And as the majority shareholder, I called an emergency meeting with myself at 3 a.m. this morning. The vote was unanimous. You are out." He crumpled the paper in his fist. "You can't do this. This is illegal. I'll sue you." "You can try," I said. "But Darnell has the logs. Every sushi dinner, every trip to Aspen, every designer handbag. It amounts to over $2 million in unauthorized personal spending in the last 2 years. That is embezzlement, Marcus. If I take this to the district attorney, you aren't just losing your job, you are going to prison." The word prison hung in the air between us. Marcus went pale. The fight drained out of him instantly. He looked at the paper in his hand, then at me. He looked small. He looked like a child again. "Dad," he whispered, "please. Robert is waiting. He's going to invest." "Robert is a fraud," I said, cutting him off. "But that's a lesson you're going to have to learn on your own. Right now you have bigger problems." I walked to the door and opened it again. The company cars have been reported as unauthorized. The GPS kill switches have been activated. If you drove the Porsche here, don't bother trying to start it. It's a brick. You'll have to walk home. Marcus stood up. He looked around the apartment as if seeing it for the first time. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and fear. "You're ruining my life," he said. "No, son," I replied, looking him dead in the eye. "I'm just taking back the one I gave you. You pushed me down. Now you have to learn how to stand up on your own. Get out." Marcus stared at me for a long, agonizing second. Then he threw the crumpled paper on the floor and stormed out. I watched him walk down the hallway. I waited. A minute later, I heard the sound of an engine trying to turn over. It clicked word and died. Then silence. Then a scream of frustration echoing from the parking lot. I closed the door and locked it. I picked up the crumpled paper from the floor and smoothed it out. I placed it on the table next to my coffee. The coffee was cold now, but for the first time in years I felt warm. The cancer had been cut out. Now the healing could begin. But God did the surgery hurt. The silence in my apartment didn't last long. It was shattered less than 5 minutes later, not by a knock, but by the sound of my front door flying open against the wall. I hadn't locked it in time. Or maybe deep down I wanted them to come back. I wanted to look them in the eye one more time before I pulled the final lever. Tiffany marched in first. The cold wind from the hallway followed her, but it was nothing compared to the ice in her eyes. She was wearing a white fur coat that probably cost more than my entire apartment complex. Her makeup was smeared slightly, likely from the tears she had shed in the car, but her rage had dried them up. Marcus trailed behind her, looking less like a CEO and more like a frightened puppy hiding behind its mother. He was holding the termination letter I had given him, waving it in the air as if it were a dirty tissue. He wasn't crying anymore. He was laughing. It was a manic, high-pitched laugh that bounced off the walls of my small living room. "You are losing it, Dad," Marcus said, tossing the paper onto my coffee table. "You are actually losing your mind. You can't fire me. You can't terminate me." Do you know why he stepped closer, invading my personal space, smelling of expensive cologne and fear? "Because I own the company," he spat. "I bought it. Remember 5 years ago? We signed the papers. I paid you. It's mine. You are just a senile old man sitting in a rented apartment trying to play boss. You have no power here. None." Tiffany stepped up beside him, crossing her arms. She looked around my apartment with a sneer of absolute disgust. Her eyes lingered on my old recliner, the bookshelf filled with paperbacks, the simple kitchen. "Look at this place," she said. "It smells like mothballs and failure. And you think you can dictate our lives. You think you can ruin our Christmas." She took a step toward me, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Listen to me, old man. Marcus is being nice. I won't be. If you don't unfreeze those accounts right now, we aren't just going to ignore you. We are going to bury you." I stood my ground. I didn't blink. I had stared down union bosses who threatened to break my legs in the 80s. I wasn't afraid of a woman whose hardest day of work was choosing between a latte and a cappuccino. "Bury me," I asked calmly. "Is that the plan?" "Oh, it's not a plan. It's a promise," Tiffany hissed. "My father is furious. Do you know who Robert Sterling is? He eats little trucking companies like yours for breakfast. He has lawyers who cost more an hour than you made in a year." She poked a manicured finger into my chest. "We are going to declare you mentally incompetent. That's what we're going to do. We'll tell the judge you're suffering from dementia, that you're paranoid, that you're a danger to yourself and the business. And you know what happens then?" She smiled, a cruel twisting of her lips. "We take power of attorney. We put you in a home, not a nice one, Winston. One of those state-run facilities where the nurses ignore you and the food tastes like cardboard. And while you rot there, Marcus and I will sell your precious company, bulldoze this dump of an apartment, and live the life we deserve." Marcus looked at her surprised. Even he seemed shocked by the brutality of her words. But he didn't stop her. He didn't say, "Tiffany, that's too far." He just looked down at his shoes, complicit in his silence. I felt a coldness spread through my veins. It wasn't fear. It was the final death of any affection I held for them. She had just threatened to lock me away, to steal my freedom, to erase my existence. I looked at Marcus. "Is that what you want, son? To put your father in a cage?" Marcus looked up, his face hardening. "I want my company back, Dad. If you stand in the way, then you leave us no choice." I nodded slowly. I walked over to the small safe I kept in the corner of the room. I spun the dial. Left to 10. Right to 24. Left to 5. The heavy click of the lock opening was the only sound in the room. I reached inside and pulled out a single framed object. It wasn't a stack of money, it wasn't a gun, it was a $1 bill. I held it up. It was framed in cheap black plastic. On the bottom, in Marcus's handwriting, it said, "The price of an empire." "Do you remember this, Marcus?" I asked. He rolled his eyes. "Yeah, the dollar I paid you for the company. Proof that it's mine. A legal transaction. Consideration paid. Contract closed." I walked over to the table and placed the frame face down. Then I picked up a file folder from the safe. "You always were lazy with the reading, Marcus," I said. "You were so excited to be called CEO, so desperate to show this woman that you were a big shot that you didn't read the contract. You just signed where the little sticky note told you to sign." I opened the folder. "Page 42, I said. Clause 7A. The moral turpitude and founder respect clause." I began to read aloud. My voice was steady, filling the room. "In the event that the purchaser defined herein as Marcus Carter engages in conduct that is deemed grossly disrespectful, abusive, or physically harmful to the founder, Winston Carter, or if the purchaser misuses company funds for personal gain in excess of $50,000. I paused and looked up at them. Tiffany's smirk was faltering. Marcus had gone pale. "Then this agreement of sale is rendered null and void ab initio, meaning from the beginning. The ownership reverts entirely to the founder. The $1 payment is to be returned, and the purchaser is immediately removed from all leadership positions without severance." I closed the folder with a soft snap. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a wrinkled dollar bill. I smoothed it out on the table next to the termination letter. "Here is your dollar back, Marcus." The room was silent. The air felt heavy, suffocating. Marcus stared at the dollar bill as if it were a poisonous snake. That's not real," he stammered. "That's a fake clause. You just made that up." "It's notarized," I said. "It's filed with the state. And Darnell has already sent copies to the board of directors and the bank. It's over. You don't own the company. You never really did. You were just leasing it, and you broke the lease the moment you put your hands on me last night." Tiffany let out a scream of frustration. She grabbed the frame with the dollar bill and smashed it on the floor. Glass shattered everywhere, mixing with the memory of the wine bottles from the night before. "I don't care about your stupid contracts," she yelled. "You think a piece of paper scares me? My father is Robert Sterling. He has millions. He has connections." She turned to Marcus, grabbing his lapels and shaking him. "Don't listen to him, Marcus. He's bluffing. He's just a pathetic old man trying to scare us. We are going to sue him. My dad will hire the best legal team in Chicago. We will crush him." She turned back to me, her eyes blazing. "You think you've won? You haven't won anything. My father is going to buy your pathetic little trucking company. He's going to buy it, strip it for parts, and fire every single one of your loyal drivers. He's going to leave you with nothing. And when you are broke and homeless, don't come crawling to us." I looked at her. I looked at the hatred in her face. And for the first time I felt a flicker of amusement. She was playing a poker game, betting everything she had, but she didn't know I had seen her cards. She didn't know that I had spent the last 3 hours with a private investigator's report on her precious father. "Go ahead, Tiffany," I said softly. "Call him. Tell him to buy the company." I walked to the door and held it open. "But before you do, you might want to ask your father why his last 3 development projects have stalled. Ask him why the SEC sent a subpoena to his office last week." Tiffany froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. What she whispered. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "I'm just an old man, right? A senile old man. But even I know that when a man needs to borrow money from his son-in-law's company credit card to pay for a brunch, he isn't exactly a tycoon. Get out of my house," I said, my voice hardening into steel. Tiffany stared at me, her face losing all its color. She looked at Marcus, then back at me. She didn't have a witty comeback this time. She grabbed Marcus's arm, her fingernails digging into his suit jacket. "Come on," she muttered, dragging him toward the door. "We're leaving. We're going to Daddy. He'll fix this. He'll destroy you." Marcus looked at me as he passed. He looked at the dollar bill on the table. He looked at the shattered glass. He looked like he wanted to say something, but the fear of his wife was stronger than the love for his father. He lowered his head and walked out. I slammed the door behind them. I locked the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the cold wood and closed my eyes. The war had started. They were going to come at me with lawyers. They were going to come at me with lies. They were going to rely on Robert Sterling to be their savior. I walked back to the table and picked up the wrinkled dollar bill. I folded it neatly and put it in my pocket. I walked to the window and watched them get into Tiffany's car. I watched them argue. I watched Tiffany screaming at Marcus, hitting the dashboard. I took a deep breath. "You are waiting for Robert to save you," I whispered to the empty room. "But you don't realize that Robert is the one who is drowning, and he is going to pull you both down with him." I picked up my phone and dialed Darnell. "Get the legal team ready," I said, "and call the private investigator back. I want everything on Robert Sterling, every bank account, every loan, every lie. If they want to threaten me with a shark, I'm going to show them that their shark has no teeth." I hung up. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the hunter. And the hunt was just beginning. The papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who looked too young to be carrying the weight of a family's destruction in his messenger bag. He wouldn't look me in the eye when he handed me the thick manila envelope. He mumbled an apology as if he knew that inside that envelope lay the final severance of a bond between father and son. I didn't blame him. I took the envelope into my kitchen and slit it open with a dull butter knife. The heading was bold and aggressive. Marcus Carter versus Winston Carter. Petition for emergency injunctive relief and constructive trust. I read through the legal jargon. My son had hired a downtown firm known for two things: expensive retainers and aggressive tactics. They were painting a picture of me that was unrecognizable. The lawsuit claimed I was suffering from cognitive decline. It claimed I had acted with malice to sabotage the company's reputation. It claimed that the Omega Protocol was an invalid instrument signed under duress. It was a masterpiece of fiction. Marcus was trying to sue his way back into the CEO's chair because he knew he couldn't earn his way back. I called Darnell immediately. He had already received a digital copy. He laughed. It was a dark, dry laugh. "Winston, this is desperate," he said. "They are filing for an emergency hearing to unfreeze the assets. They claim Marcus can't pay his mortgage or buy food." "Let them file," I said. "But while they play games in the courtroom, I am going to the one place where paper threats don't matter. I am going to the yard." The yard was the heart of Carter Logistics. It was 20 acres of asphalt and diesel fumes on the south side of Chicago, where 300 semi-trucks docked loaded and departed every single day. It was where I had spent 40 years of my life. It was where I knew every pothole, every flickering light, and the name of every man who sat behind a steering wheel. Marcus hated the yard. He preferred the glass-walled office downtown with its espresso machine and view of the lake. He only came to the yard for photo opportunities, wearing a hard hat that looked like a toy on his head. I pulled up to the main gate in my pickup truck. The security guard, a man named Old Joe who had started working for me in 1985, stood up straighter than I had seen him in years. He didn't ask for ID. He just saluted and hit the button to open the gate. "Welcome home, Mr. Carter," he said. I drove through the rows of idling trucks. The smell of diesel fuel was perfume to me. It smelled like work. It smelled like honesty. But as I approached the loading docks, I saw chaos. Marcus was there. He was standing on the main platform wearing a camel hair coat that was already stained with grease. He was screaming. His voice was high and thin, cracking with panic. He was waving a clipboard at a group of drivers who were standing with their arms crossed, looking at him with the stone-faced expression of men who have seen everything and are impressed by nothing. I got out of my truck and leaned on my cane for a moment, just watching. "You get those trucks moving right now," Marcus yelled. "We have a delivery for Sterling Enterprises that has to go out by noon. I don't care about the manifests. I don't care about the safety checks. Get in the trucks and drive." The drivers didn't move. At the front of the group was Grady, a giant of a man with a beard like steel wool. Grady had been my lead driver for 20 years. He had driven through blizzards that grounded airplanes. He had never missed a delivery in his life. But today, he stood like a mountain. "We ain't moving, Mr. Marcus," Grady said, his voice deep and rumbling like an idling engine. "What did you say to me?" Marcus shrieked, stepping closer to the edge of the dock. "I am the CEO. I sign your checks. If you don't get in that truck right now, you are fired. Do you hear me? Fired!" Grady spit on the ground near Marcus's shiny leather shoes. "You can't fire me, son, because you ain't the boss. We heard about the lockdown. We heard the accounts are frozen. If you can't pay for gas, how are you going to pay us?" I walked forward. The sound of my boots on the gravel was rhythmic and heavy. One by one, the drivers turned their heads. As they saw me, the wall of crossed arms dropped. Their postures softened. Respect rippled through the crowd like a wave. Marcus saw them looking and spun around. When he saw me, his face went from red to a ghostly pale. He looked like a child caught playing with his father's power tools. "Dad," he stammered, "what are you doing here? You aren't allowed on the premises." My lawyer said, I didn't let him finish. I didn't even look at him. I walked past him and climbed the stairs to the dock. I stood next to my son, but I felt miles above him. I looked at Grady. I looked at the men. "Morning, gentlemen," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the yard, cutting through the wind. "Morning, Mr. Carter," the men replied in unison. I turned to Marcus. He was trembling. He was trying to push a shipment out, a shipment to Sterling Enterprises, Robert's company. He was trying to liquidate inventory to generate quick cash under the table. He was trying to strip the copper wiring out of the walls before the house collapsed. I looked at the clipboard in Marcus's hand. I snatched it from him. He didn't dare fight me. I scanned the manifest. High-end electronics, laptops, servers, $2 million worth of inventory marked for delivery to a warehouse in New Jersey owned by a shell company linked to Robert. "You were going to steal it," I whispered to him. "You were going to steal the inventory to pay your debts." "I'm just fulfilling an order," Marcus hissed, desperate. "It's a legitimate sale." I looked out at the fleet. "Grady!" I shouted. "Yes, sir," Grady replied, stepping forward. "Trucks 4, 5, and 6, I said, pointing to the 3 massive rigs already loaded at the bay. "Kill the engines." Marcus gasped. "You can't do that. That's breach of contract. We have a deadline. Kill the engines," I repeated louder. "Nobody leaves this yard. Lock down the cargo and get the auditor down here. Now." Grady smiled. It was a slow, satisfied smile. You heard the man. He shouted to the crew, "Shut 'em down." The sound of 3 massive diesel engines sputtering into silence was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It was the sound of authority returning to its rightful owner. Marcus stood there, impotent and small in his expensive coat, watching his last desperate plan evaporate into the cold Chicago air. I turned to him. "Get in my office, Marcus. We are going to have a little chat about these invoices." He followed me like a prisoner walking to the gallows. We walked through the warehouse past the rows of shelves stacked to the ceiling. The office was exactly as I had left it 5 years ago, except for the smell. It smelled of stale cologne and fear. I sat behind the desk. My desk. I called the internal auditor, a sharp young woman named Sarah, who had been signaling me about irregularities for months, but had been blocked by Marcus. She came in 5 minutes later carrying a laptop and a stack of files. "Show him, Sarah," I said. She placed the files on the desk. Marcus stood by the window, refusing to sit. "I don't need to see this," he muttered. "Oh, I think you do," I said. Sarah opened the first file. It was a forensic accounting of the marketing budget. "Mr. Carter?" She began, her voice professional and crisp. "We found a series of recurring payments to a company called Lux Consulting Group. The invoices are vague. Consulting fees, brand management, image consulting." "How much?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. $500,000 in the last 6 months, Sarah said. I looked at Marcus. "Who is Lux Consulting Group?" He didn't answer. He was staring out the window at the trucks that weren't moving. "I'll tell you who it is," Sarah continued. "We traced the incorporation papers. The registered agent is Tiffany Sterling." The silence in the room was heavy. $500,000. $500,000 stolen from the company to pay a wife who did nothing but complain. "But that's not all," Sarah said, flipping the page. "We cross-referenced the dates of the payments with Tiffany's social media activity. Every time a payment was made to Lux Consulting, she posted a photo of a new Birkin bag, a new diamond bracelet, a trip to Paris. She wasn't consulting Marcus," I said, my voice low and dangerous. She was shopping, and she was using my company as her personal piggy bank. Marcus turned around. Tears were streaming down his face. She told me she needed the money for her business, he sobbed. She said she was building a brand. She said Robert advised her to set it up this way for tax purposes. Robert, I said, shaking my head. Always Robert. Sarah pulled out one last document. And then there are the transfers to Sterling Development. Another $500,000, labeled as advance payments for a new distribution center. We are building a new center, Marcus cried defensively. Robert found us a prime location. I looked at the address on the invoice. I knew that zip code. Sarah, bring up the satellite view of that address I ordered. She typed quickly and turned the laptop around. There was no distribution center. There was no land. It was a swamp in the middle of Florida. Your father-in-law sold you a swamp, Marcus, I said. He took $500,000 of my money and sold you mud. Marcus stared at the screen. He touched the image of the green, murky water. He collapsed into the chair in front of the desk, burying his face in his hands. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear, Dad, I didn't know. They told me it was a sure thing. Tiffany said we were going to be billionaires. I stood up. I walked around the desk and stood over him. You are not a billionaire, Marcus. You are a thief, and you are a fool. You let a woman and her con-man father play you like a fiddle. You pushed your own father down for them. And this is what they gave you in return. A swamp and a closet full of handbags. I looked at Sarah. Prepare the affidavit, I said. We are countersuing, not for incompetence, for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. Name Marcus, name Tiffany, and name Robert Sterling. Marcus looked up, his eyes wide with terror. Dad, please. Prison. Tiffany can't go to prison. She's delicate. She's a criminal, I said coldly. And so are you. I walked to the door. Get out of my office, Marcus. The police will be here in an hour to take your statement. I suggest you call your lawyer and tell him that his petition for emergency relief just became a confession of guilt. I walked out into the main warehouse floor. The drivers were waiting. They looked at me expectantly. Grady, I called out. Yes, boss. Unload trucks 4, 5, and 6. Put the inventory back in the cage. And tell the boys to take a lunch break. Pizza is on me. A cheer went up from the floor. It was a sound of relief, a sound of loyalty. I stood there breathing in the diesel fumes, feeling the weight of the company settle back onto my shoulders. It was heavy, but it was mine, and no one was ever going to push me away from it again. They say you can smell money, but I believe you can smell the lack of it even stronger. Real wealth is quiet. It sits in the back of the room and observes. It wears comfortable shoes and drives practical cars because it has nothing to prove. But debt is loud. Debt wears flashy gold watches to distract you from the shaking hands. Debt talks about millions over brunch while its credit card gets declined. And Robert Sterling smelled like debt. He smelled like a man who was running a race against a cliff edge and the ground was crumbling beneath his feet. I sat in my parked truck across the street from the coffee shop where Marcus and Tiffany were meeting him. It had been 3 days since the audit at the warehouse. 3 days since I had cut off the financial lifeline. I watched them through the window. Marcus looked haggard. His shoulders were slumped and he was wearing the same suit he had worn yesterday. The dry cleaning account had been frozen along with everything else. Tiffany looked frantic. She was gesturing wildly, her face twisted in a scowl that seemed permanently etched into her features now. But Robert looked calm. He was leaning back in his chair, smiling that oily, practiced smile of his. I could see his lips moving. I didn't need a listening device to know what he was saying. He was spinning another web. He was making promises. I watched him reach across the table and pat Marcus on the hand. I saw the relief wash over my son's face. It was pathetic. It was the look of a drowning man catching a rope, not realizing the rope was attached to an anchor. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. It was Malone. Malone was a private investigator I had used for 20 years to vet potential business partners. He was expensive, he was thorough, and he scared me a little. I have the package. Mr. Carter, Malone said, his voice raspy from years of chain smoking. Where do you want to meet? The usual spot, I said. 10 minutes. I took one last look at the coffee shop. Robert was checking his watch, probably signaling that he had another imaginary meeting to attend. He stood up, leaving the bill on the table for my broke son to worry about. I put the truck in gear and drove away. I met Malone at a small park near the lakefront. The wind was whipping off the water, cutting through my coat, but I didn't feel it. Malone was sitting on a bench feeding pigeons. He didn't look up when I sat down. He just slid a thick manila envelope across the space between us. "You aren't going to like this," Winston Malone said. "Or maybe you will. Depends on how much you hate the guy." "Is it bad?" I asked. "It is worse than bad," Malone replied. "It is catastrophic. The man is a ghost, a vapor. He doesn't own anything. The penthouse he lives in rented. The car. Leased under a shell company that dissolved 6 months ago. The development projects in Florida, they are swampland, literal alligator-infested swamps." I opened the envelope. The first photo was of Robert Sterling, not in a suit but in handcuffs. It was a mugshot from 20 years ago. Grand larceny in Nevada, Malone explained. He did 3 years, changed his name when he got out. His real name is Robert Stinsky. I flipped through the pages. Bank statements that showed a sea of red ink, lawsuits from contractors who were never paid. And then I saw the diagram. It was a complex web of circles and arrows. "It is a Ponzi scheme," Winston Malone said, pointing to the diagram. "A classic setup. He takes money from new investors to pay off the interest for the old investors to keep them quiet. He promises 20% returns in a month. But the well is running dry. He is bleeding cash. He is robbing Peter to pay Paul, but Paul is already dead." I looked at the list of investors. I saw names of local doctors, dentists, small business owners, people who had probably lost their life savings. "And here's the kicker," Malone said, tapping a document near the bottom of the stack. "The FBI is sniffing around. They have opened a file. It is sealed, but my contact says they are building a case for wire fraud and money laundering. They are just waiting for one more big transaction to nail him. One more victim to hand over a large sum of money so they can trace the transfer." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. One more victim. I remembered the conversation Sarah, the auditor, had uncovered, the urgent need for capital. Robert wasn't just trying to help Marcus and Tiffany, he was trying to use them as his escape hatch. He needed a fresh injection of cash to pay off someone dangerous or to buy a ticket to a country with no extradition treaty. "He is desperate," Malone said, standing up and brushing birdseed off his coat. "He owes money to some very bad people in New York. Loan sharks who don't send lawyers, they send guys with baseball bats. That is why he is pushing your son so hard. He needs that liquidity. He needs it yesterday." I handed Malone an envelope of cash. He nodded and walked away, disappearing into the gray afternoon. I sat there on the bench alone with the truth. The file in my lap felt heavy like a tombstone. I thought about the scene in the coffee shop. Robert telling Marcus, "Don't worry, son, I will transfer $2 million next week." It was a lie so bold it was almost admirable. He didn't have $2 million. He didn't have $2,000. He was probably hoping to get Marcus to sign over the deed to the estate or liquidate the company assets so he could steal the proceeds and run. My phone pinged. It was a text from Marcus. "Dad, I know you are angry, but please listen. Robert just confirmed he is moving funds. We are going to be fine. He is going to buy the company from you. We will pay you back every cent plus interest. Just unfreeze the accounts for 48 hours so we can facilitate the transfer fees. Please, it is a matter of life and death." I laughed. A bitter, sharp sound that startled a nearby squirrel. He was right about one thing. It was a matter of life and death, but not in the way he thought. I looked at the mugshot of Robert Stinsky again, the man who sat at the head of my table, the man who drank my wine, the man who my son pushed me down to honor. He wasn't a tycoon, he wasn't a savior, he was a tick, a parasite looking for a vein, and my son had offered him his own father's blood. I picked up the file and walked back to my truck. Marcus thought I was the villain of his story. He thought I was the obstacle standing between him and success. He didn't realize that I was the only wall standing between him and total destruction. If I unfroze those accounts, Robert would drain them dry in 10 minutes and disappear, leaving Marcus to face the FBI alone. I started the engine. I wasn't going to unfreeze the accounts. I wasn't going to save Marcus from the embarrassment of being broke. I was going to let him starve a little longer, but I was going to destroy Robert Sterling. I pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward the one place I knew Robert couldn't hide from. The truth. I dialed Darnell. "Get the district attorney on the line," I said, "and tell him I have a present for him." A present wrapped in an Armani suit. "And Darnell," I added, watching the city skyline loom ahead. Find out where Robert is holding his next investor meeting. I think it is time for me to crash a party." I hung up. My stupid son. My foolish, blind son. He had pushed away the man who built the foundation to worship the man who was digging his grave. He wanted a VIP guest fine. I would make sure Robert got the VIP treatment. 3 meals a day and a cellmate named Bubba. The drive home was slow. I replayed the moment of the push in my mind. The physical pain had faded, but the image of Marcus's face twisted in sycophancy for a criminal was burned into my retinas. He would hate me for this. When the truth came out, he would hate me for being right. That is the burden of a father. Sometimes you have to be the villain to save your child. I patted the file on the passenger seat. "Enjoy your dinner tonight, Robert," I whispered, "because tomorrow you are going to choke on it." The snow had returned to Chicago, covering the tracks of my previous departure, but it could not cover the rot that was festering inside the estate I had built. It was Friday night. A week had passed since I was pushed to the floor. A week since I had frozen the accounts. A week since my son had learned what hunger felt like. But instead of humility, he had chosen desperation. I sat in the back of a black sedan this time, leaving my truck at the yard. Beside me sat Darnell checking his tablet. Behind us were 2 squad cars, their light bars dark for now, waiting for the signal. We were parked just outside the iron gates of the mansion. Through the tinted windows I could see the glow of the house. It was lit up like a Christmas tree in Times Square. Cars lined the driveway, Mercedes, Bentleys, Ferraris. It was a gathering of wolves, and Robert Sterling was the alpha. He was hosting a fundraising gala. That was what the invitation said. An exclusive opportunity for select investors to buy into the ground floor of Sterling Development's Florida expansion. It was a bold move, a suicidal move. He was trying to pull one last massive scam to pay off the sharks before the FBI closed the net, and he was doing it in my house. I signaled the driver to wait. I wanted to let the party reach its fever pitch. I wanted Robert to feel safe. I wanted him to feel like he had won. Inside the house, the air was thick with the smell of roasted lamb and greed. I knew exactly what was happening because Darnell had a mole inside. One of the catering staff was the son of one of my drivers. He had an earpiece in, and he was feeding us audio. I closed my eyes and listened. I could hear the clinking of glasses. I could hear Robert's voice booming and charismatic. "Ladies and gentlemen," he was saying, "the future is not something you wait for. It is something you seize. This project in Florida is not just land, it is a legacy. And tonight I am giving you the chance to be part of history." There was polite applause. Then the audio shifted. I heard the heavy oak door of the library close. The sound of the party became muffled. "Marcus, come in, sit down." It was Robert. And Marcus. I listened intently. My son's voice sounded thin, shaky. "Robert the First." "I don't know about this," Marcus stammered. "The accounts are still frozen. Dad won't budge. We have no liquidity. If I sign this—" "Marcus, listen to me." Robert interrupted, his voice dropping to a soothing, hypnotic register. "This is just a bridge loan, a formality. I have a private lender ready to wire $5 million tonight. But they need collateral. They need to see that you are committed." "But this is a lien on the house," Marcus said. "A second mortgage. If we can't pay it back, they take the house." Tiffany's voice cut in sharp and impatient. "Just sign the paper, Marcus. My God, stop being such a coward. Daddy is trying to save us. With this $5 million, we can pay off your father. We can buy the company back. We can be free of him. Do you want to be poor forever? Do you want to live in that car?" I felt a pang of sorrow in my chest. They were cornering him, 2 predators circling a wounded animal. Marcus didn't know that the house wasn't his to mortgage. He didn't know that by signing that paper he would be committing bank fraud. He would be pledging an asset he no longer owned. I looked at Darnell. "It is time," I said. Darnell nodded and spoke into his radio. "Move in." The driver hit the gas. The squad cars behind us flipped on their sirens. The night was suddenly ripped apart by flashing blue and red lights bouncing off the snow and the stone facade of the mansion. We roared up the driveway, scattering the valet parking attendants. The police cars screeched to a halt, blocking the exit. I stepped out of the car. The cold air hit my face, but I felt nothing but heat. I walked up the steps, Darnell and 4 uniformed officers flanking me. The front door was locked. I didn't knock. I took the master key from my pocket, the one key I had never given back, and turned the lock. We burst into the foyer. The music stopped. The chatter died instantly. 50 guests turned to look at us. They saw the uniforms. They saw the grim faces. And they saw me, the old man who had been pushed aside. I didn't stop. I walked straight through the crowd. People parted like the Red Sea, terrified. I marched toward the library doors. I threw them open. The scene inside was exactly as I had imagined. Marcus was sitting at the heavy wooden desk, the pen hovering over a document. Tiffany was standing over him, her hand on his shoulder, pressing him down. Robert was standing on the other side holding a glass of scotch, watching the pen with hungry eyes. They all froze. Dad Marcus whispered, the pen slipping from his fingers. Robert recovered first. He set his glass down and put on his best smile, though his eyes darted to the police officers behind me. Winston. What a surprise. We were just discussing business. A bit aggressive with the escort, don't you think? This is a private party. It is not a private party, I said, my voice filling the room. It is a crime scene. Tiffany stepped forward, her face twisting into a snarl. Get out of here. You have no right. This is our house. Wrong, I said. I pulled a document from my inside coat pocket. It was the deed. The original deed. This house is the property of Carter Logistics, I announced. And as the sole owner of Carter Logistics, I am evoking my right to secure the premises. This property is currently being seized as part of an investigation into corporate embezzlement and fraud. I looked at Marcus. He was staring at the deed, then at me. You took the house, he asked, his voice trembling. I didn't take it, son, I said softly. You gave it away. You violated the terms of the trust, and right now I am saving you from making the biggest mistake of your life. I pointed to the paper on the desk. If you had signed that, Marcus, you would be going to federal prison for mortgage fraud. You can't pledge collateral that doesn't belong to you. Marcus looked at the paper, then at Robert. Robert's smile had vanished. He was looking for an exit. Robert was trying to make you a criminal. Marcus, I continued, just like him. Robert straightened his jacket. This is ridiculous. I am leaving. I will not be insulted by a senile truck driver. He moved toward the French doors that led to the patio. Officer, I said. 2 police officers stepped forward, blocking Robert's path. Robert Sterling Darnell said, stepping into the light holding a warrant, or should I say, Robert Stinsky. Robert froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking gray and old. We have a warrant for your arrest, Darnell read from the paper. Issued by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Charges include wire fraud securities, fraud money laundering, and running a Ponzi scheme. The room behind us gasped. The guests had gathered at the open library doors listening. Tiffany let out a scream. That's a lie. My father is a billionaire. He's a genius. He's broke, Tiffany, I said, looking her in the eye. He has been broke for 10 years. The Florida Project. It's a swamp. The New York investors. They are mobsters. He was using you. He was using Marcus. He was trying to drain my company to pay his debts so he wouldn't get his legs broken. I walked over to the desk and picked up the loan document. I tore it in half. Robert Stinsky Darnell continued, You have the right to remain silent. One of the officers grabbed Robert's wrists and spun him around. The click of the handcuffs was loud and final. It was the sound of a guillotine dropping on a lifetime of lies. Robert didn't fight. He slumped, looking defeated. He looked at Tiffany. I'm sorry, Princess, he whispered. It was a good run while it lasted. No, Tiffany shrieked, lunging at the officers. You can't take him. He has money. He promised me. An officer held her back. She turned to Marcus. Do something, she screamed. Tell them who he is. Fix this. Marcus stood up slowly. He looked at his father-in-law in handcuffs. He looked at his wife, who was more concerned about the money than the crime. And then he looked at me. I saw the realization hit him. It was a physical blow. He swayed slightly. He scammed us, Marcus whispered. I didn't answer him. I turned to the guests who were watching with wide, fearful eyes. The party is over, I announced. Everyone has 5 minutes to clear the premises. After that, anyone remaining will be charged with trespassing. The stampede was instantaneous. People grabbed their coats and ran desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. As the officers led Robert away, Tiffany collapsed onto the floor weeping, not for her father, but for her lifestyle. Marcus stood alone in the center of the library. He looked at his hands, the hands that had pushed me, the hands that had almost signed away his freedom. I walked up to him. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to tell him it would be okay. But I couldn't. Not yet. He hadn't learned the full lesson. "You have an hour to pack your things," I said. Marcus looked up, tears streaming down his face. "Dad, where will we go?" "I don't know," I said, "but you won't be staying here. This house is closed." I turned and walked out of the library, leaving him standing in the wreckage of his false idol. Outside, the snow was falling harder. The blue lights of the police cars were fading into the distance, carrying away the man who had poisoned my family. I got back into the car. "Did we get him?" Darnell asked quietly. "We got the shark," I said, watching the house go dark as the servants began to turn off the lights. "But the real work starts now. Now I have to see if my son can learn to swim." I looked at my reflection in the window. I looked older, tired, but my eyes were clear. "Drive," I said. We drove away into the night, leaving the mansion silent and empty, the way it should have been until it was earned. The sound of handcuffs locking into place is distinct. It is a sharp metallic click that signals the end of freedom and the beginning of a nightmare. In my library, under the glow of the crystal chandelier, that click echoed like a gunshot. Robert Sterling, the man who had sat at the head of my table, the man who had been toasted as a savior, was now hunched over his hands, bound behind his back. The facade of the billionaire tycoon evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a scared old man with dyed hair and a cheap suit. He didn't go quietly. For a brief second, panic took over. He tried to lunge toward the French doors, thinking he could outrun the FBI agents waiting in the snow. It was a pathetic attempt. Darnell simply stepped in his way, his broad frame blocking the exit like a wall. Robert bounced off him and stumbled back into the arms of the officer. "Let me go," Robert shouted, his voice cracking. "Do you know who I am? I am Robert Sterling. I have friends in Washington. I will have your badges for this." Darnell didn't flinch. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. He held them up for the room to see. The guests who had crowded into the hallway were watching in stunned silence. Their champagne glasses were forgotten, their gossip silenced by the spectacle of ruin. "We know exactly who you are," Darnell said, his voice calm and authoritative. "You are Robert Stinsky, convicted felon, known confidence man, and the architect of the Sterling Development Fund, a Ponzi scheme that has defrauded investors of over $40 million. The number hung in the air. 40 million. Tiffany let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. She rushed forward, grabbing Robert's lapels, shaking him violently. "Tell them it's a lie, Daddy," she shrieked. "Tell them you are rich. Tell them about the Florida project. Tell them about the Swiss accounts. Fix this." Robert looked at his daughter. For the first time, the mask of the doting father slipped. He looked annoyed. He looked at her with the cold calculation of a man who realizes his assets are no longer useful. "Shut up, Tiffany," he snapped. The room gasped. Tiffany froze, her hands trembling on his jacket. "It's over," Robert muttered. "The Florida project is a swamp. The accounts are empty. The money is gone. All of it." Tiffany stepped back as if he had slapped her. Her knees gave way and she collapsed onto the Persian rug, the voluminous fabric of her gown pooling around her like a wilting flower. She looked at her hands, the diamonds on her fingers suddenly feeling heavy and fake. "No," she whispered, rocking back and forth. "No, no, no. We are rich. We are special. You promised." I watched from the doorway, leaning on my cane. I felt no pity. I looked at Marcus. My son was standing by the desk, his face drained of all color. He was staring at Robert as if seeing a monster. The realization was washing over him in waves. I could see the gears turning in his mind. He was replaying the last 5 years, the dinners, the vacations, the advice, the way he had sidelined me, his own father, to make room for this charlatan. He had traded a man who built a legacy with sweat and blood for a man who built a castle out of playing cards. Marcus looked at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a terror I hadn't seen since he was a child waking up from a nightmare. But this wasn't a dream. This was the wreckage of his own choices. "He lied to us," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. "He stole from us." I walked into the room. The guests parted for me, terrified of the old man they had ignored just an hour ago. I stopped in front of Marcus. "He didn't steal from you, Marcus," I said, my voice low and hard. "You gave it to him. You opened the door. You invited the vampire in because you liked the way he flattered you. You liked feeling important. You liked the idea of easy money." I turned to the room. The party guests were still lingering, staring with morbid curiosity. They were vultures waiting to pick the carcass clean. "The show is over," I announced, my voice booming off the mahogany walls. I pointed my cane at the front door. "This is my house, and I am clearing out the trash." I looked at the head of security, a man I had hired myself years ago who had been forced to take orders from Tiffany. "Johnson," I barked. "Yes, Mr. Carter," Johnson replied, stepping forward, a grim smile on his face. "Get them out," I ordered. "All of them, every single guest, every waiter, and especially the family." I gestured to Marcus and Tiffany. "Toss them out, immediately, just like they tossed me out on Christmas Eve." Marcus's head snapped up. "Dad, you can't mean that. It's freezing outside. We have nowhere to go." I looked at him. I looked at the warm fireplace. I remembered the cold wind hitting my face when he pushed me out the door. I remembered the wine soaking my shirt. I remembered the feeling of absolute abandonment. "I didn't have anywhere to go either," I said, "but I found a way." Johnson moved toward the guests. "All right, folks, you heard the man. Party is over. Exit is that way. Move it." The guests scrambled. It was a stampede of fur coats and tuxedos. No one said goodbye to Marcus. No one offered to help Tiffany up from the floor. They just ran, desperate to avoid being associated with the scandal. The police began to drag Robert away. He didn't look back at his daughter. He was already calculating his plea deal. Tiffany finally stood up. Her mascara was running down her face in black streaks. She looked at me with pure venom. "This is your fault," she screamed. "You called them. You ruined everything." I laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. "I didn't build the Ponzi scheme, Tiffany. I didn't spend money I didn't have. I just turned on the lights. And roaches hate the light." "Get her out, Johnson," I said, turning my back on her. Johnson grabbed Tiffany by the arm. She screamed, kicking and scratching, but he marched her toward the door. Her threats faded into the distance, replaced by the cold reality of the night. Now it was just me and Marcus. The library was quiet. The fire crackled in the hearth. The smell of expensive cologne still lingered, tainted now by the scent of failure. Marcus took a step toward me. He looked broken. The arrogance was gone. The CEO posture was gone. He looked like a little boy who had broken a window and was waiting for the punishment. He fell to his knees. He didn't just kneel, he collapsed. He grabbed the hem of my coat, his hands shaking. "Dad," he sobbed. "Daddy, please. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. I was tricked. He manipulated me. He told me it was for the family." I looked down at him. I saw the top of his head. I saw the gray hairs starting to form. He was 40 years old. He was a grown man. He buried his face in my coat, weeping uncontrollably. "Forgive me," he begged. "Please don't throw me out. I have nothing. They took the cards. They took the cars. If you kick me out, I will be on the street. I am your son." For a moment, my heart wavered. The instinct to protect him, to lift him up, to wipe away his tears was overwhelming. It was the instinct that had led me to give him the company in the first place. It was the instinct that had weakened him. I reached down. I placed my hand on his shoulder. He looked up, hope flooding his tear-stained face. Then I pushed him away. I didn't push him hard, just enough to break his grip on my coat, just enough to create distance between us. "No, Marcus," I said. He froze. "You weren't tricked," I said, my voice trembling with the effort of holding back my own tears. "You weren't an innocent victim. You saw the red flags. You saw the swampland photos. You saw the fake invoices, but you ignored them. I leaned down so I was eye level with him. You ignored them because you are greedy. You wanted the easy life. You wanted the status without the work. You wanted to be Robert Sterling more than you wanted to be Winston Carter's son. Dad, no." "Yes," I hissed. "You pushed me down, Marcus. You chose him. You sat him in my chair. You defended him when I warned you. That wasn't manipulation. That was a choice. You chose a crook over your father because he promised you gold and I only promised you work." I stood up straight, adjusting my coat. "Well, the gold is gone, and the work is gone too." I pointed to the door. "Get out." Marcus stared at me, unable to believe what he was hearing. "But Dad, I am your flesh and blood, and that is the only reason I am not pressing charges against you for being an accomplice," I said. "That is the only mercy you are going to get tonight. Johnson returned to the doorway. "Ready, sir?" he asked. "Take him," I said, turning away. Johnson walked over and pulled Marcus to his feet. Marcus didn't fight. He was too in shock. He let himself be led out of the library, out of the foyer, and toward the front door. I followed them at a distance. I wanted to see it. I needed to see it. I stood in the hallway as Johnson opened the massive oak door. The wind howled outside, blowing snow into the warm house. Tiffany was already outside, sitting on the steps, shivering in her thin dress. She looked up as Marcus was shoved out to join her. The door began to close. Marcus turned around one last time. He looked at me through the narrowing gap. His eyes were hollow. "Dad," he whispered. "Goodbye, Marcus," I said. The door slammed shut with a heavy final thud. I reached out and threw the deadbolt. Click. Silence descended on the house. The party was over. The guests were gone. The thieves were expelled. I walked back to the library. I walked over to the desk where the unsigned loan documents still lay torn in half. I picked up the pieces and threw them into the fire. I watched the paper curl and blacken, watched the false promises turn to ash. I walked over to the dining room. I looked at the long table. The plates were still full of food. The wine glasses were half empty. I walked to the head of the table. The chair was empty. I pulled it back. I sat down. I was alone in a house that was too big for me. I was alone with the silence. But as I sat there gripping the arms of my chair, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt clean. The infection was gone. The fever had broken. I picked up a glass of wine that Robert had abandoned. I raised it to the empty room. To the truth, I whispered. I took a sip. It was bitter, but it was mine. The wind off Lake Michigan has a way of finding the cracks in your soul, especially when you have nowhere to hide from it. It was 2 a.m, and I was sitting in my truck parked a block away from a 24-hour gas station on the edge of the city. I wasn't there to buy gas. I was there to watch the final act of a tragedy I had written but hadn't wanted to direct. Under the flickering fluorescent lights of the station parking lot sat a silver Range Rover. It was Tiffany's car. It was the only vehicle that hadn't been leased through the company. I had let them keep it. Call it mercy, or call it a test. I wanted to see how far they could drive on a tank of entitlement when the road was paved with reality. They hadn't made it far. The engine was dead. I could tell because the exhaust pipe had stopped puffing white smoke hours ago. Inside the windows were fogged up with condensation, the only barrier between them and the brutal Chicago winter. I adjusted my binoculars. I wasn't watching to gloat. I was watching because a father never truly stops being a father even when his son has become a stranger. I needed to see if Marcus had any fight left in him. I needed to see if he would step up or if he would crumble. Inside the car, the war was raging. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Body language screams louder than any voice. I saw Tiffany's silhouette flailing. She was hitting the dashboard. She was screaming. Her hands were flying around the small cabin like trapped birds. She turned to Marcus, who was slumped in the driver's seat. She pointed a finger in his face. It was the same finger she had used to demand champagne just days ago. Now she was demanding answers he didn't have. I could imagine the venom spilling from her lips. "You are useless. You are weak. This is all your fault." She was right, of course, but not in the way she thought. It was his fault for trusting her. It was his fault for thinking that love was a transaction where you trade your father's dignity for a woman's approval. Marcus sat there taking it. He didn't fight back. He just stared out the windshield at the desolate gas station. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The expensive suit he wore was wrinkled now, a costume from a play that had been canceled. Suddenly the passenger door flew open. Tiffany stepped out into the freezing air. She wasn't wearing a coat. She had probably left it at the mansion in her haste to escape the police. She was shivering, violent tremors shaking her thin frame, but her rage seemed to keep her warm. She walked around to the driver's side and kicked the tire. She screamed something at the closed window. Then she did something that made my stomach turn. She pulled out her phone. She made a call. It wasn't a call to a lawyer. It wasn't a call to a friend. I watched her posture change. She smoothed her hair. She put a hand on her hip. She forced a smile even though there was no one there to see it. It was the posture of a predator sensing a new opportunity. 10 minutes passed. Marcus remained motionless in the car. He looked like a statue of defeat. Then headlights swept across the parking lot. A low-slung red sports car pulled in. It was flashy, loud, and tacky. The kind of car driven by men who have more money than taste. The window rolled down. I saw a man inside, young, probably in his 20s, wearing sunglasses at night. Tiffany leaned into the window. She laughed. It was that same fake tinkling laugh she had used on me for years. She touched the man's arm. She pointed back at the Range Rover and rolled her eyes. I watched Marcus turn his head. He was watching his wife flirt with a stranger while he froze to death a few feet away. The betrayal was absolute. Tiffany didn't even look back at him. She opened the door of the sports car and slid inside. The brake lights flared red and the car peeled out of the lot, kicking up slush and gravel onto the side of the dead Range Rover. She was gone. She had abandoned the sinking ship the moment the water touched her ankles. Marcus was alone. I lowered the binoculars. My heart ached a dull throb that radiated through my chest. I wanted to start my truck. I wanted to drive over there, jump-start his car, and take him to a diner. I wanted to buy him a hot meal and tell him that it wasn't his fault that he married a scorpion. But I didn't move. If I saved him now, he would never learn. If I cushioned the fall, he would never learn how to get up. He needed to sit in that cold car. He needed to feel the silence she left behind. He needed to understand that the only person who would ever truly have his back was the man he had pushed away. I watched him for another hour. The windows of the Range Rover were completely iced over now. I worried about hypothermia. I worried about him giving up. Then, just as I was about to break my own rule and call Darnell to send help, the driver's door opened. Marcus stepped out. He looked terrible. His face was gray. His lips were blue. He stood there in the empty parking lot, shivering uncontrollably. He looked at the direction the red sports car had gone. He stood there for a long time, staring into the darkness. Then he did something that surprised me. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He didn't throw a tantrum. He reached into the back seat and pulled out a blanket. It was an old plaid blanket, one that I recognized. It was the emergency blanket I insisted every company car carry. He wrapped it around his shoulders. He walked to the trunk and opened it. He pulled out a tire iron. For a second, I thought he was going to smash the car. I thought he was going to lose control. But he didn't. He walked to the gas station convenience store. I watched him through the glass. He approached the clerk. He held up the tire iron. My hand went to the door handle. Was he going to rob the place? No. He placed the tire iron on the counter. He gestured to it. He was bartering. He was trying to trade the tool for something. The clerk shook his head. Marcus pleaded. He pointed to the coffee pot. He pointed to the hot dogs rolling on the grill. The clerk hesitated, then shrugged. He took the tire iron and put it under the counter. He handed Marcus a cup of coffee and a sandwich wrapped in foil. Marcus took the food with both hands. He didn't eat it immediately. He bowed his head slightly to the clerk, a gesture of humility, a gesture of thanks. He walked back out to the car. He didn't get back inside. He sat on the hood of the dead Range Rover, wrapped in the old company blanket, eating a gas station hot dog in the middle of the night. I leaned back in my seat. Tears pricked my eyes, but this time they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of hope. He had survived the night. He had survived the abandonment. And for the first time in his life, he had fed himself not with my money, not with Robert's lies, but with his own resourcefulness. He was at rock bottom. The concrete was hard and cold. But rock bottom has one advantage. It is a solid foundation. You can build on rock. You can't build on a swamp. I started my engine. I didn't turn on the headlights until I was a mile down the road. "Sleep well, Marcus," I whispered to the rearview mirror. "Tonight, you lost a wife who never loved you, but you might have just found the man you were supposed to be." The road ahead was long. There would be more cold nights. There would be hunger. There would be shame. But as I drove back to my warm apartment, I knew one thing for certain. The boy who pushed me was gone. The man who was going to earn his seat back had just been born. Returning to the corner office felt like putting on an old coat that you had forgotten fits you perfectly. The leather chair still held the shape of my back. The view of the Chicago skyline was still breathtaking. Although now covered in the gray sludge of January, it looked more like a battlefield than a vista. But the air in the room was different. It didn't smell of stale cologne and pretense anymore. It smelled of coffee paper and work. I walked to the window and looked down at the yard. The trucks were moving with a rhythm that had been missing for years. Under Marcus's reign, the schedule had been chaotic, driven by panic and short-term gains. Now it was a symphony of logistics. I watched truck number 42 pull out of the gate. That was Grady's truck. He honked the air horn as he passed the building, a deep, mournful blast that wasn't a warning but a salute. I sat down at the mahogany desk. It was cluttered with files, but they were good files. Contracts, maintenance schedules, payroll. The first thing I did was call a general assembly. I didn't do it in the boardroom with catered sandwiches. I did it on the warehouse floor, standing on a pallet of shipping crates, just like I did in 1980. 300 men and women gathered around. They were tired, they were wary. They had spent 5 years watching their benefits shrink while the CEO bought sports cars. They looked at me with a mixture of hope and skepticism. They knew I was back, but they didn't know if I was the same man. I didn't use a microphone. I didn't need one. "Gentlemen and ladies," I said, my voice echoing off the corrugated metal roof, "I am not going to give you a speech about synergy or corporate vision. I am too old for buzzwords." There was a ripple of laughter. It was nervous, but it was there. "I am here to tell you that the bleeding has stopped," I continued. "The leeches are gone. The parasites have been removed." I looked at Grady standing in the front row with his arms crossed. "For the last 5 years you have been told that there was no money for raises. You were told that the cost of fuel was eating our profits. You were told that you had to do more with less." I paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the cold air. That was a lie. The money wasn't being eaten by fuel. It was being eaten by greed. It was being spent on parties you weren't invited to and houses you will never live in. I pulled a piece of paper from my pocket. It was the new payroll directive I had signed that morning with Darnell. Effective immediately, I announced every hourly employee is receiving a 15% wage increase. The room went deadly silent. They couldn't believe it. 15% was unheard of in this economy. And I added, raising my voice to cut through the shock, "We are reinstating the full medical benefits package that was cut 2 years ago. And the pension matching." For a second, nobody moved. Then Grady took off his cap and slapped it against his thigh. "Hell yeah," he shouted. The warehouse erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. It was the sound of men who had been holding their breath for years, finally exhaling. I watched them high-five each other. I saw a few tough old drivers wiping their eyes. I didn't smile. I just nodded. I stepped down from the pallet and walked back through the crowd. They parted for me, patting me on the back, shaking my hand. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. Good to have you back, boss." "God bless you, Winston." I took the elevator back up to the silence of the 12th floor. I closed the door and collapsed into my chair. My hip was aching. My hands were trembling slightly. It felt good to be the hero. It felt good to be the provider again. But as the adrenaline faded, the silence of the office became oppressive. I looked at the phone on my desk. It hadn't rung. Not once in 3 weeks. I knew why. I had blocked Marcus's number. I had blocked Tiffany's number. I had told the receptionist that if anyone named Carter called, they were to hang up immediately. But knowing it was my choice didn't make the silence any less loud. I wondered where he was. Was he still sleeping in the car? Was he in a shelter? Did he find a job? My mind conjured up images of him freezing on a park bench, hungry and alone. The father in me wanted to pick up the phone, just to check, just to send a little money, just enough for a motel room, just for a week. I reached for the receiver. My fingers hovered over the buttons. I dialed the first 3 digits of his old cell number. Then I stopped. I looked at the photo on my desk. It was a picture of Marcus when he was 7 years old, holding a fishing rod, smiling with a missing front tooth. If I call him now, I whispered to the empty room, I kill him. If I save him now, he learns nothing. He learns that Daddy will always be there to clean up the mess. He learns that betrayal has a safety net. And a man who believes in safety nets never learns to walk the tightrope of life. I hung up the phone. The click sounded like a gunshot. I turned my chair to face the window. I have to let him die, I thought. I have to let the boy die so the man can be born. The door opened behind me. It was Darnell. He walked in carrying a leather portfolio, looking solemn. "It's ready, Winston," he said. I spun the chair around. "Let's see it." Darnell placed the document on the desk. It was thick, bound in heavy blue paper. The title was simple: Last Will and Testament of Winston Carter. This was the final piece of the puzzle, the final lock on the door. I put on my reading glasses and scanned the pages. Article 4. Darnell said, pointing to a paragraph in the middle, "The disposition of assets." I read the words I had dictated. "I, Winston Carter, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath 100% of my assets, including all shares of Carter Logistics, all real estate holdings, and all liquid cash, to the Martha Carter Scholarship Fund." I looked up at Darnell. "And the terms?" I asked. Darnell flipped the page. "Here." The fund is dedicated to providing full college tuition for African American children from the South Side of Chicago who demonstrate academic excellence and financial need. It specifically prioritizes children of single mothers and those whose parents work in manual labor industries. I nodded. It was a good legacy. It was money that would build doctors, engineers, and teachers. It was money that would go to kids who knew the value of a dollar because they had never seen one. And the executor, I asked. I am the executor, Darnell said. And upon my passing, a board of trustees comprised of 3 senior employees of Carter Logistics. Perfect, I said. I picked up the pen. Darnell hesitated. He put his hand on the document. Uncle Winston, he said softly, are you sure about this? I looked at him. Darnell continued, his voice tentative. This is everything, the whole empire. You aren't leaving. Anything for family. I looked at the pen in my hand. It was a heavy Mont Blanc, a gift from Martha 30 years ago. Marcus is family, Darnell said. I know what he did. I know it was unforgivable. But he is your son. If something happens to you tomorrow, he gets nothing. Not a cent. I signed my name at the bottom of the page. Winston James Carter. The signature was bold, aggressive. I closed the folder and handed it back to Darnell. I am not leaving him nothing, Darnell. Darnell looked confused. But the will says... The will talks about money, I said, standing up and walking to the coat rack. I am not leaving him money. Money is what ruined him. Money is what made him weak. Money is what attracted the leeches. I put on my coat and grabbed my cane. I am leaving him something much more valuable. I am leaving him the necessity of survival. I walked to the door and looked back at Darnell, who was holding the document like it was a loaded weapon. When I was 20 years old, Darnell, I had $5 in my pocket and a pregnant wife. I was terrified. I was hungry. And because I was terrified, I worked. Because I was hungry, I hustled. That hunger made me who I am. I pointed to the window to the city outside. I robbed Marcus of that hunger. I fed him before he could cry. I caught him before he could fall. And in doing so, I crippled him. I opened the door. So no, I am not leaving him a check. I am leaving him the pavement. I am leaving him the cold wind. I am leaving him the struggle. That is his inheritance. And if he survives it, if he claws his way back up from that pavement, then he will have something I can never give him. What's that? Darnell asked. Self-respect, I said. I walked out of the office, leaving Darnell alone with the millions that would never belong to my son. The elevator ride down was quiet. I felt lighter. The burden of the legacy was gone. It belonged to the future now, to the kids who would appreciate it. As I walked out of the building, the cold wind hit my face. It stung. It bit. I thought of Marcus out there somewhere in this wind. I hope you're cold, son, I whispered into the scarf Martha had knitted me. I hope you're so cold that you finally start a fire of your own. The word toxic is usually reserved for chemical spills or nuclear waste, but in the corporate world of Chicago, it was the label now permanently stamped on my son's forehead. I learned later that Marcus spent the first 2 weeks living in a motel on the outskirts of the city, using the last of the cash from his wallet to pay for a room that smelled of stale smoke and despair. Every morning he would put on his one remaining suit, which was slowly losing its crisp shape, and go into the city to look for work. He didn't go to the warehouses, he went to the skyscrapers. He went to the consulting firms and the hedge funds, thinking that his resume, which listed him as CEO of Carter Logistics for 5 years, still held power. He was wrong. The grapevine in this city is faster than fiber optics. Everyone knew. They knew about the audit. They knew about the frozen accounts. They knew about the FBI raiding the Christmas party. When Marcus walked into those glass offices, he wasn't greeted as a peer. He was greeted as a liability. I can imagine the interviews, the polite smiles that didn't reach the eyes, the way they would glance at his frayed cuffs. One headhunter, a man I had known for 30 years, told me later that he sat Marcus down and gave him the hard truth. He said, Marcus, you are radioactive. You let a con man run a Ponzi scheme out of your father's boardroom. No one is going to trust you with a petty cash box, let alone a department. Go home. But Marcus had no home to go to. The motel kicked him out when the cash ran dry. The car finally ran out of gas and was towed. He spent 3 nights sleeping in a 24-hour laundromat, pretending to wait for clothes he didn't have washing in a machine he hadn't started. Hunger is a powerful motivator. It strips away pride layer by layer. until you are left with only the animal instinct to survive. And when his stomach cramped so hard he couldn't stand up. Marcus finally stopped looking up at the skyscrapers and started looking down at the pavement. He found himself at the gates of Miller Transport. They were my biggest competitor, a massive logistics firm on the west side. They didn't care about resumes. They didn't care about scandals. They needed bodies. It was the peak of the winter shipping season, and they were churning through casual labor like coal in a furnace. Marcus stood in line at 4 a.m. with men who had spent their lives doing hard labor, men with scars, men with prison tattoos, men who looked at Marcus's soft hands and expensive haircut and laughed. The foreman was a brute of a man named Kowalski. He looked at Marcus and sneered. "You ever done a day's work in your life, pretty boy?" Marcus lied. He said yes. He said he needed the money. Kowalski threw him a neon vest that smelled of sweat and pointed to Bay 4. "Unload the truck," he barked. "You get $15 an hour. If you break anything, you pay for it. If you slow down, you are gone." For the first time in his life, Marcus walked onto a loading dock, not as the owner, but as the mule. The truck was full of industrial auto parts, heavy steel rotors, brake drums, crates that weighed 50 pounds each. Marcus grabbed the first box. The weight shocked him. It pulled at his shoulders and strained his lower back. He carried it to the pallet. Then he went back for another, and another, and another. By 10 a.m, his hands were raw. He had never developed calluses. His skin was soft, pampered by years of lotion and manicures. The cardboard boxes acted like sandpaper, rubbing the skin off his fingertips until they bled. His back was screaming. Every time he bent down, a sharp bolt of lightning shot up his spine. He was sweating despite the freezing temperature of the open dock. The sweat dripped into his eyes, stinging them, blinding him. He dropped a box around noon. It wasn't fragile, but the sound of it hitting the concrete echoed through the warehouse. Kowalski was on him in a second. "Hey, Hollywood, pick it up. You think you are too good to bend over? You think this is a game? Lift with your legs, not your back, you idiot." Marcus picked it up. He didn't argue. He didn't say, "Do you know who I am?" He couldn't. He was nobody. He was just a pair of hands, a back, and a heartbeat. Lunch break came at 1 o'clock. The other workers gathered in the break room, opening lunch boxes filled with sandwiches made by wives or mothers. Marcus had nothing. He had no money for the vending machine. He sat in the corner on a plastic chair, nursing a cup of tap water, his stomach growling loud enough for the men nearby to hear. An older worker, a man with gray hair and eyes that looked suspiciously like mine, tossed an apple onto Marcus's lap. "Eat up, kid," the man said. "You look like you're going to pass out." Marcus didn't reject it. He ate that apple like it was a steak dinner. He ate the core. He ate the seeds. As he chewed, he looked around the room. He saw the tired faces of the men. He saw the way they rubbed their sore shoulders. He saw the dirt under their fingernails. And suddenly, a memory hit him. He remembered me coming home when he was a child. He remembered running to hug me and my clothes smelling exactly like this break room. Diesel, dust, sweat. He remembered how I would groan when I sat down in my recliner. He used to think I was just old. He used to think I was gross. He didn't want to touch my hands because they were rough. Now, looking at his own bleeding hands, he understood. He realized that the mansion, the private schools, the cars, the suits, every single thing he had ever owned had been bought with this pain. I had carried boxes so he wouldn't have to. I had frozen on docks so he could be warm. And how had he repaid me? He had called me embarrassing. He had pushed me down. The break room had a small television mounted in the corner. It was usually tuned to sports, but today it was on the local news channel. The volume was low, but the image caught Marcus's eye. It was a live broadcast from the Chicago Business Gala. A banner across the bottom of the screen read Entrepreneur of the Year. And there I was. I was standing at a podium wearing a tuxedo holding a crystal trophy. I looked strong. I looked dignified. The camera zoomed in on my face as I gave my acceptance speech. Marcus stood up and walked closer to the TV. The other men quieted down, watching the screen. "That's Winston Carter," one of the workers said. "That man is a legend. He just took his company back from some thieves and gave everyone a raise." "Good man." Marcus stared at the screen. He watched me speak. "This award doesn't belong to me," I was saying on the television. "It belongs to the men and women who wake up at 4 a.m. to move this country. It belongs to the people with dirt under their fingernails and aches in their backs. I built my company on the belief that there is no shame in hard work, only honor. A man who thinks he is too good to sweat is a man who has forgotten where he comes from." I watched myself on the screen lift the trophy. I dedicate this to the future, I said, to the hope that the next generation learns that you cannot inherit respect. You have to earn it. The camera cut away to applause. Marcus stood frozen in the break room of the rival company. The words hit him harder than any physical blow. You cannot inherit respect. You have to earn it. He looked down at his dirty neon vest. He looked at his bloody hands. He looked at the reflection of his face in the dark window of the break room. He saw the grime on his cheeks. He saw the exhaustion in his eyes. And then he broke. It wasn't a loud sob. It was a silent heaving of his chest. Tears cut tracks through the dust on his face. He wasn't crying because he was poor. He wasn't crying because he was hungry. He wasn't crying because he missed the Porsche. He was crying because for the first time in 40 years, he actually saw me. He saw the giant I was, and he saw the dwarf he had been. He realized that I hadn't punished him because I hated him. I had punished him because I loved him enough to show him the truth. The whistle blew, signaling the end of lunch. Kowalski stuck his head in the door. Let's go, ladies, back to work. Those trucks aren't going to load themselves. Marcus wiped his face with his sleeve. He sniffed loudly. He took a deep breath. He didn't run out the back door. He didn't quit. He turned to the older man who had given him the apple. Thanks, he whispered. Then he walked back out onto the dock. He walked to Bay 4. He grabbed a 50-pound box. He bent his knees. He lifted. It was heavy. It hurt. But as he walked toward the truck, he held his head up a little higher. He wasn't the CEO of Carter Logistics anymore. He was just a man moving a box. But for the first time in his life, he was earning his place in the world. And that box felt lighter than the crown he used to wear. Time heals all wounds, they say, but that is a lie. Time just builds scar tissue. It covers the wound with thick, tough skin so you don't feel the pain as sharply, but the nerve endings are still there, buried deep, waiting for a touch to set them on fire again. 6 months had passed since the night of the eviction. 6 months since the police lights faded from my driveway. 6 months since I had spoken to my son. Summer had arrived in Chicago, bringing with it a humidity that stuck to your skin like a wet wool blanket. The city was sweating. I was sweating too, but it wasn't from the heat. I was at the Miller Transport Hub on the west side. It was a massive, sprawling complex of concrete and corrugated steel where 50,000 packages moved every hour. I wasn't there to reminisce. I was there to buy them out. Miller was retiring, and he wanted to sell his routes to the only man he trusted to treat his drivers right. Me. We were walking the floor, Miller and I. He was talking about efficiency rates and fuel costs, but I was barely listening. I was looking at the men. I always looked at the men. The warehouse was a chaotic symphony of forklifts, beeping conveyor belts, humming and shouting voices. It smelled of ozone and unwashed bodies. It was the smell of honest labor, and for the first time in months I felt at home. "Let me show you the loading bay," Miller said, pointing toward the massive open doors where the sunlight was pouring in, like molten gold. "That is where the real work happens. We have a new crew down there. Good kids. Hungry." We walked out onto the dock. The noise was deafening. Semis were backing up, air brakes hissing. Men were running back and forth with hand trucks, their shirts soaked through with sweat. And then I saw him. At first my brain refused to process the image. It was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. The man I saw didn't belong in my memory of my son. My son was soft. My son was manicured. My son wore suits that cost more than these men made in a month. The man I was looking at was a ghost. He was standing by Bay 12 wrestling with a crate that looked like it weighed 100 pounds. He was wearing a stained gray t-shirt that hung loosely on his frame. He had lost weight, at least 20 pounds. His cheekbones jutted out sharp and angular. His arms, once soft and pale, were now brown from the sun and ropey with muscle. He had a beard, not a fashionable groomed beard, but the scruffy, uneven growth of a man who couldn't afford razor blades. I stopped walking. The air left my lungs. "Winston, are you okay?" Miller asked, touching my elbow. "You look like you saw a ghost." I didn't answer. I couldn't take my eyes off him. I watched Marcus lift the crate. He grunted the sound raw and guttural. He heaved it onto the truck bed. He wiped his forehead with the back of a glove that was held together by duct tape. He looked exhausted. He looked broken. But he was working. He turned around to grab another box, and that was when he saw me. The moment our eyes met, the entire warehouse seemed to go silent. The forklifts disappeared, the shouting faded. It was just a father and a son separated by 20 feet of concrete and a canyon of silence. I saw the instinct kick in. I saw his body tense up. He took a half step back toward the shadows of the truck. He wanted to hide. He wanted to run. Shame is a powerful reflex. It makes us want to disappear into the earth rather than face the person we disappointed. My heart hammered against my ribs. Part of me wanted to turn away too. I didn't want him to see me seeing him like this. I didn't want to be the witness to his humiliation. But I didn't move. I stood my ground. I gripped my cane until my knuckles turned white. "Don't run, Marcus," I begged silently. "Please don't run." If he ran now, he would be running for the rest of his life. Marcus stopped. He looked at the exit. Then he looked at me. I saw a struggle play out on his face. I saw him swallow hard. I saw him take a deep breath that made his thin chest expand. He didn't run. He stepped out of the shadow. He walked forward not with the arrogant strut of the CEO, but with the heavy, measured walk of a working man. He stopped 5 feet away from me. He smelled of sweat and old grease. There was dirt in the creases of his neck. A bruise was blooming on his forearm. My impulse was to reach into my pocket, to pull out my checkbook, to say, "Come home," to say, "This is enough. You have suffered enough. Let me buy you a steak. Let me give you a bed." But I remembered the will. I remembered the lesson. Marcus looked at me. His eyes were clear. The cloud of entitlement was gone, burned away by 6 months of survival. He took off his glove. He wiped his hand on his dirty pants. For a second, I thought he was going to reach out to shake my hand. But he didn't. He knew he hadn't earned that yet. He stood up straighter. He looked me in the eye. "Hello, Mr. Carter," he said. The words hit me like a physical blow. Mr. Carter. Not Dad, not Daddy, not Pops. Mr. Carter. It wasn't an insult. It was an acknowledgement. He was acknowledging the distance between us. He was acknowledging that he had lost the right to familiarity. He was speaking to me as a man speaks to a superior, as a worker speaks to a legend. There was no pleading in his voice. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just stood there holding his ground, accepting his reality. I looked at his hands. They were bleeding, fresh cuts over old scars. "Hello, Marcus," I said. My voice was steady, but inside I was screaming. He nodded, just a quick, sharp nod. Then he looked at the crate waiting on the pallet behind him. "I have to get back to work," he said softly. "The truck leaves in 10 minutes. He didn't wait for my permission. He didn't wait for a goodbye. He turned his back on me. He walked back to the pallet. He bent his knees. He grabbed the box. He lifted it. He went back to work. I stood there watching him. I watched my son, the boy who used to cry if his latte was too cold, carrying 50 pounds of steel in 100-degree heat without a single complaint. Miller looked at me confused. "You know that guy Winston?" I watched Marcus disappear into the back of the truck. "I used to," I said quietly. "I used to know a boy who looked like him. But I don't know that man, not yet." I turned around. "Let's go, Miller," I said. "I have seen enough." We walked back toward the exit. Every step took effort. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around to go back to drag him out of that hellhole. But I kept walking. I walked out of the warehouse into the blinding sunlight. My driver was waiting with the car door open. The air conditioning inside was blasting a sharp contrast to the furnace I had just left. I climbed into the back seat. The door closed, shutting out the noise, shutting out the heat, shutting out my son. "Drive," I whispered. The car pulled away. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I stared at the leather seat in front of me. I traced the stitching with my finger, and then the dam broke. I didn't make a sound. I didn't want the driver to hear. But the tears came hot and fast. They spilled over my cheeks, dripping onto my expensive silk tie. I wept for the boy I had lost. I wept for the pain he was feeling right now. I wept for the blisters on his hands and the hunger in his belly. But as I wiped the tears away, a strange feeling settled in my chest. It wasn't sorrow. It wasn't regret. It was pride. For 40 years I had tried to build a man out of money, and I had failed. I had created a monster. But today, in a dirty warehouse on the west side, I saw the first bricks of a real foundation. He didn't ask for help. He didn't run. He looked me in the eye, and he went back to work. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the leather interior. "He is going to make it," I whispered to myself. It is going to take years. It is going to hurt. He might never be rich again. He might never sit at the head of a boardroom table again. But he stood up. My driver glanced in the rearview mirror. "Are you all right, sir?" I pulled a handkerchief from my pocket and wiped my eyes. I sat up straight. I buttoned my jacket. "I am better than all right," I said, my voice strong again. I looked out the window at the passing city. My son just grew up today. I closed my eyes and let the car carry me home. I was alone, but for the first time in 6 months I wasn't worried. Marcus was in hell, but he was walking through it on his own 2 feet, and that was all a father could ever ask for. They say that a desperate animal is the most dangerous kind, but I have always found that a desperate liar is the most pathetic. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late August. The summer storms were rolling in off Lake Michigan, turning the sky a bruised purple and lashing rain against the glass walls of my office. I was reviewing the quarterly projections, which for the first time in 5 years were actually green. The company was healthy, the drivers were happy, but the silence in my personal life was still a void that no amount of profit could fill. My secretary buzzed me. Her voice was hesitant. "Mr. Carter, there is a woman here to see you. She says it is an emergency. She says she is family." I knew who it was before I even pressed the button to let her in. There was only one person audacious enough to claim family ties after trying to destroy the family name. "Send her in," I said. The door opened and Tiffany Sterling walked in, or at least a version of her. The Tiffany I knew was a creature of high polish and sharp edges. She was all hairspray designer silk and disdain. This woman looked like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. Her hair was wet plastered to her skull. She wasn't wearing makeup, which I knew was a calculated decision. She wanted to look raw. She wanted to look vulnerable. She was wearing a trench coat that looked 2 sizes too big, and she was clutching it around her stomach as if protecting a wound. She didn't wait for me to invite her to sit. She collapsed into the chair opposite my desk, sobbing. It was a theatrical performance worthy of Broadway. "Winston," she gasped, her voice trembling. "Thank God you saw me. I didn't know where else to go. He is crazy, Winston. He has lost his mind." I sat back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers. I didn't offer her a tissue. I didn't offer her water. I just watched. "Who is crazy, Tiffany?" I asked. "Marcus," she cried. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and rimmed with red. "He has changed. Ever since we lost everything, he has become a monster. He drinks. He screams. And last night—" She paused for dramatic effect, touching her cheek. There was no bruise there, but she flinched as if there were. "He hit me, Winston. He blamed me for the money. He blamed me for his father hating him. He threw me against the wall. I barely escaped with my life." I looked at her. I thought about Marcus. I thought about the boy who used to catch spiders in a cup and carry them outside because he was afraid to squash them. I thought about the man I had seen in the warehouse 6 months ago eating an apple with dirty hands. I knew Marcus was weak. I knew he was foolish, but violent. That wasn't in his DNA. That was in hers. I am sorry to hear that I said, my voice flat. "Did you call the police?" "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "I couldn't do that to him. He is still your son. I didn't want to ruin his life any more than it is already ruined. I just want to be safe. I want to be with family." She leaned forward, reaching across the desk to take my hand. I pulled it back before she could touch me. "We need help, Winston," she pleaded. "Not for me, I don't care about me, but for the baby." The room went silent. The only sound was the rain hammering against the glass. "The baby," I repeated. She looked down at her stomach, rubbing it gently through the coat. "I am pregnant," she whispered. "I found out last week. It is a boy, Winston. Your grandson, the heir to the Carter legacy." She looked up, tears spilling fresh from her eyes. "I can't let him grow up on the street. I can't let him be raised by a violent man like Marcus. I need you. He needs you. Please, Winston, let me come back. Let me live in the guest house. I will do anything. I just want to protect your blood." It was a masterstroke. She knew my weak spot. She knew that for 75 years I had wanted nothing more than to see the Carter line continue. She knew that the thought of a grandchild would bring most men to their knees. But she forgot one thing. I am not most men, and I do my homework. I opened the top drawer of my desk. Inside sat a red folder. I had received it 3 days ago from Malone, my private investigator. I had kept tabs on Tiffany, not because I cared about her, but because I knew she would circle back eventually. Parasites always return to the host when they run out of other blood to suck. I pulled the folder out and placed it on the desk. Tiffany watched the folder. Her crying slowed. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. "You are good, Tiffany," I said. "You really are. You almost had me. The wet hair, the shaking hands, the abuse story. It is a compelling narrative." "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice hardening. I opened the folder. "First, let's talk about the abuse," I said. I pulled out a photograph. It was taken 2 nights ago. It showed Tiffany sitting in a booth at a high-end bar on the north side. She wasn't crying. She wasn't being thrown against a wall. She was laughing. She was holding a martini in one hand and the hand of a man in the other. A man with slicked back hair and a red sports car. "This is Chad, right?" I asked. "The guy you left Marcus for at the gas station. Malone tells me Chad is a club promoter. Not exactly a billionaire, but he has a nice apartment. Or he did until he kicked you out yesterday morning because you maxed out his credit card." Tiffany's face went pale. That is an old photo. "It is dated Tuesday," I said, pointing to the timestamp. "You weren't with Marcus last night, Tiffany. You haven't seen Marcus in 6 months. You don't even know where he lives." She stammered, trying to find a new lie. I went to see him. I tried to reconcile. That is when he hit me." I pulled out another paper. It was an affidavit from the foreman at Miller Transport. "Marcus was pulling a double shift last night," I said. "From 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. He was surrounded by 50 witnesses and 12 security cameras. Unless he has learned to teleport, he didn't touch you." Tiffany stopped crying. The vulnerability vanished. She sat up straight, the mask slipping completely. "Fine," she spat. "So I lied about the hit. But I am not lying about the baby. I am pregnant Winston, and it is Marcus's. You can't turn your back on your own grandson. You can't be that heartless." I looked at her stomach. I looked at the hands clutching it. "You know," I said softly, "I really wanted a grandson. I used to dream about teaching him how to fish, how to drive a truck, how to be a man." I pulled out the final document from the folder. It was a medical record. It wasn't recent. It was dated 4 years ago from a private clinic in Miami. It was obtained legally through the company insurance audit since Tiffany had been on my policy at the time. "But there is a problem with your story, Tiffany." I slid the paper across the desk. She looked down. She read the header. Her eyes widened in horror. "Tubal ligation procedure," she whispered, reading the words she thought were buried forever. "You had your tubes tied 4 years ago," I said. "You told Marcus you were trying to get pregnant. You let him buy ovulation kits. You let him cry when the tests came back negative month after month. You let him think it was his fault. You let him think he was the one failing the family." I stood up. My rage was a cold, hard knot in my chest. "You never wanted children. You hated them. You just wanted the security of being the mother of the heir. But you made sure it would never happen." Tiffany stared at the paper. Her hands dropped from her stomach. The imaginary baby was gone. The leverage was gone. "You investigated my medical history," she hissed. "That is illegal." "It is a company audit," I said calmly. "You were an employee dependent, and fraud is a serious offense." I leaned over the desk. "You came in here and lied about domestic violence. You lied about a child. You tried to use an unborn baby that doesn't exist as a bargaining chip to get back into my wallet." I walked to the window and looked out at the rain. "I have met bad men in my life, Tiffany. I have met killers. I have met thieves. But you are something else. You are hollow. There is nothing inside you but hunger." I turned back to her. "Get out!" She stood up. She wasn't the wet rat anymore. She was a viper cornered. "You think you are so high and mighty," she screamed. "You think Marcus is going to come back to you. He won't. He is a loser. He is working like a dog. He will die in that warehouse, and it will be your fault." I walked to the door and held it open. "Maybe," I said, "but at least he will die a man. You will die exactly as you are. A lie in a wet coat." She grabbed her purse. She marched toward the door, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She stopped right in front of me. Her eyes were full of hate. "I will find a lawyer," she threatened. I smiled. "Go ahead. Call one. Call the police while you are at it. I have the fraud evidence right here. I would love to see you explain to a judge why you faked a pregnancy to extort a senior citizen." She faltered. She knew she had lost. She walked out into the hallway. And Tiffany, I called after her. She stopped, but didn't turn around. Don't go looking for Marcus. If you go near him, if you try to drag him back into your web, I won't just freeze your accounts. I will expose everything. The medical records, the affairs, the theft. I will make sure the whole of Chicago knows exactly who Tiffany Sterling is. She didn't answer. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button repeatedly. I watched the doors close on her. I walked back to my desk. I picked up the red folder and put it back in the drawer. I locked it. I sat down and looked at the empty chair where she had sat. I felt a wave of nausea pass over me, the cruelty of it, to invent a life just to save your own lifestyle. I picked up the phone. I dialed security. "This is Carter," I said. "Revoke Tiffany Sterling's guest clearance. Permanently. If she sets foot in the lobby again, call the police for trespassing." I hung up. I looked at the quarterly projections again. The numbers were black and white, clean, logical. Life was messy. People were messy. But the trash had finally been taken out. I thought about Marcus again. I wondered if he knew about the baby lie. I wondered if he knew she was barren. I wouldn't tell him. Not yet. That was a pain he didn't need right now. Let him mourn the marriage. Don't let him mourn a child that never was. I turned my chair to the window, watching the storm rage over the city. "You are safe now, son," I whispered. "The witch is gone. Keep lifting those boxes. Keep climbing. I am waiting at the top. The calendar on my wall is just paper and ink, but sometimes it feels like a countdown clock." It had been exactly 365 days since the night of the push. One full trip around the sun. The seasons had changed from the brutal gray of winter to the humid sweat of summer and back to the biting cold of December. Chicago was once again wrapping itself in ice, preparing to freeze the weak and test the strong. I sat in my study, the same room where Robert Sterling had been arrested. The fireplace was crackling, but this time there was no party. There were no leeches drinking my champagne. It was just me and the silence. But it was a good silence. It was the silence of a house that had been purged of infection. Darnell stopped by on his way home to drop off the weekly reports. He placed a stack of envelopes on my desk. Most of them were business correspondence bills and charitable solicitations. But one envelope stood out. It was small, plain, and white. There was no return address. The handwriting on the front was familiar, but different. It was Marcus's handwriting, but the loops were tighter, the lines straighter. It didn't have the hurried, frantic scrawl of a man rushing to sign a check he couldn't cash. It looked deliberate. I waited until Darnell left before I opened it. My hands were steady. I wasn't expecting an apology. Apologies are cheap. I had heard 1,000 of them from Marcus over the years, usually followed by a request for money. I sliced the envelope open. Inside was a simple card. No picture, just text. It wasn't a Christmas card. It wasn't a birthday card. I put on my reading glasses. "Dear Mr. Carter," the card read. He was still calling me that. Good. "I am writing this because I know you are watching. I know you know about the promotion to shift manager at Miller Transport. I know you know I am renting a studio apartment on 45th Street. I know you know because Darnell checks on me once than I thought. I am not writing to ask for my job back. I am not writing to ask for money. I am writing to tell you something I never thought I would say. Thank you. Thank you for locking the door. Thank you for letting the car run out of gas. Thank you for not saving me. If you had opened that door, I would still be a child. Today I am tired, I am sore, and I am broke. But I am a man, and that is worth more than the trust fund." There was no signature, just the letter M. I sat there for a long time holding that card. The paper felt heavy. It carried the weight of a year of suffering, a year of waking up at 4 a.m, a year of instant noodles and cold showers. I looked at the phone. For a year I had held the line. I had been the stone wall, but a wall that never opens a gate is just a prison. And my son wasn't an inmate anymore. He was a parolee who had served his time. I picked up the receiver. The number was already in my head. I had memorized it from the employee directory I had secretly pulled from Miller Transport's database. It rang 4 times. "Hello." The voice was deeper than I remembered, rougher. It sounded like gravel. "Marcus," I said. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear the background noise of a television, probably a news program. "Hello, Mr. Carter," Marcus said. His voice was guarded. He wasn't scared, but he was cautious, like a dog that has been kicked too many times. "I got your card," I said. "Okay." I am hungry, Marcus. Another pause. Okay, he said again slowly. I am craving ribs, I said. Real ribs, not that fancy stuff they serve downtown. I am going to Smokey's on 35th Street. Smokey's was a dive. It was a shack with plastic tablecloths, fluorescent lights, and the best barbecue in the state. It was where I used to take Marcus when he was a little boy, before Tiffany came along and decided we were too good for plastic forks. I am going to be there in an hour, I continued. I hate eating alone. I held my breath. This was the test. If he asked for a ride, I would hang up. If he asked if I was paying, I would hang up. I get off shift in 40 minutes, Marcus said. I can meet you there, but I only have an hour. I have to be up early tomorrow. See you there, I said. I hung up. My heart was beating a little faster. I didn't take the Bentley. I took the old pickup truck. The one that smelled of oil and old leather. I drove through the snow, the city lights blurring past me. When I pulled into the parking lot of Smokey's, I saw him. He was leaning against a beat-up Honda Civic. It was 10 years old, rusted around the wheel wells. It was the kind of car a shift manager could afford. He was wearing a heavy Carhartt jacket and work boots. He had a beard thick and dark, keeping his face warm. He looked older. The softness around his jaw was gone, replaced by hard angles. I parked and got out. We stood there in the parking lot, the snow falling between us. He didn't run to hug me. He didn't smile. He just nodded. Mr. Carter. Marcus. We walked inside. The smell of hickory smoke and vinegar hit us. It was the smell of the past. We sat in a booth near the back. The vinyl seat was cracked, held together with duct tape. The waitress came over. She was a heavy-set woman who had worked there for 30 years. She recognized me immediately.
Well, look who it is, Big Winston, she boomed, pouring coffee into thick ceramic mugs. And little Marcus. Lord child, you have grown. You look like you have been wrestling bears. Marcus cracked a small smile. Just boxes, Martha. Just boxes. We ordered 2 slabs of ribs, coleslaw, cornbread. When the food came, we didn't talk. We ate. We ate with our hands getting sauce on our fingers. It was primal. It was honest. Finally wiping his hands on a paper napkin, Marcus looked at me. So he said, "How is business?" "It is good," I said. "Margins are up. We expanded the fleet." I heard, Marcus said. "I heard you bought out the Miller routes. That means technically I work for you again." Indirectly. Technically, I nodded. "But Miller runs his own shop. I don't interfere with personnel," good Marcus said, taking a sip of his coffee. "Because I earned that shift manager spot. I didn't get it because of my last name. In fact, nobody at Miller knows who I am. I used my middle name on the application." "Smart," I said. "They talked about logistics. We talked about fuel prices. We talked about the shortage of qualified drivers." It was the most boring conversation I had ever had in my life, and it was the most beautiful. We didn't talk about Tiffany. We didn't talk about Robert Sterling rotting in a federal prison. We didn't talk about the mansion or the cars or the millions of dollars sitting in the trust fund. We talked about work. For the first time, we were speaking the same language, the language of men who know what it means to be tired at the end of the day. I watched him as he spoke. I saw the way his eyes lit up when he talked about optimizing the loading schedule. He had a mind for this business, he always did. He just never had the respect for it. Now he had both. The waitress brought the check. She placed it in the middle of the table. My hand twitched. Habit. For 40 years I had picked up every check. For 40 years I had been the walking wallet. I watched Marcus. He looked at the check. He looked at me. Then he reached into his back pocket. He pulled out a worn leather wallet. It wasn't the alligator skin wallet Tiffany had bought him. It was cheap brown leather. He opened it. I saw a few 20s inside. Not a lot, but enough. "I invited you, Marcus," I said quietly. "I know," Marcus said. "But you taught me something this year." "What is that?" "There is no such thing as a free lunch," he said. He pulled out the cash and placed it on the table. He covered the bill and the tip. I looked at the money. It represented hours of lifting crates. It represented sweat. It was the most expensive meal he had ever bought. I didn't argue. I didn't insult him by trying to force my money on him. "Thank you," I said. He nodded. We walked out to the parking lot. The wind had picked up. Marcus buttoned his collar. "I have to go," he said. "Inventory count at 4 a.m. I looked at his rusted car. "You need new tires," I said, pointing to the bald tread on his front wheel.
That is dangerous in this snow. I know, Marcus said, opening his door. I am saving up. Next month. I wanted to say, take my truck. I wanted to say, here is $500. But I bit my tongue. Drive safe, I said. You too, Mr. Carter. He got into his car. The engine sputtered a little before catching. He backed out and drove away, his taillights disappearing into the snowy night. I stood there by my truck alone again, but the emptiness in my chest was gone. He paid the bill. It was a small thing, a meaningless thing to the outside world. But to me, it was everything. He paid the bill. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. I checked my rear-view mirror. He wasn't ready to come home yet. He wasn't ready to run the empire. But the door wasn't locked anymore. I had unlocked it tonight, and I left it just slightly ajar. One day he would walk through it, not as a beggar, not as a prince, but as a partner. I put the truck in gear and drove toward the city, my stomach full of ribs and my heart full of something that felt suspiciously like hope. The winter was still cold, but for the first time in a year, I didn't feel the chill. Christmas has a way of circling back around like a boomerang. It returns to the exact spot where you threw it, but it never lands in the same hand. The hand is older, the hand is weathered, and hopefully the hand is wiser. It was December 24th, exactly 1 year to the day since my son placed his palms on my chest and shoved me into the wine cabinet. The calendar on the wall said it was the same holiday, but the world I was standing in was unrecognizable. Last year I was in a tuxedo, standing in a foyer of marble and gold surrounded by strangers who drank my liquor and judged my age. This year I was standing on a makeshift stage made of wooden pallets in the center of the main distribution hub of Carter Logistics. The air didn't smell of imported pine and expensive perfume. It smelled of diesel fuel, industrial cleaner, and the slow roasted brisket that was being served from a line of food trucks parked by the loading bay. I looked out at the crowd. There were 400 people here. Drivers, mechanics, dispatchers, their families. Kids were running around, weaving between the forklifts that had been decorated with blinking red and green lights. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't refined, but it was warm. The heat came from the industrial blowers in the ceiling and from the bodies of people who actually liked each other. I adjusted the microphone stand. My hip, the one that had been bruised black and blue last year, still gave me a phantom twinge when the weather turned cold. It was a reminder, a permanent bookmark in the story of my life. I looked for Marcus. He wasn't at the front. He wasn't at the VIP table because there was no VIP table. We had set up long rows of folding tables covered in red paper cloths. Everyone sat together. The mechanic sat next to the accountant. The janitor sat next to the lawyer. I finally spotted him near the back. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt and clean slacks. He was holding a plastic cup of punch. He was talking to Grady, the head driver. I watched them for a moment. Grady was laughing, slapping Marcus on the back. Marcus was smiling. It wasn't the practiced, shark-like smile of the CEO he used to be. It was a genuine, shy smile. The smile of a man who is just happy to be included. I tapped the microphone. The feedback squeal cut through the chatter. The room went quiet. 400 faces turned toward me. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice booming through the warehouse. A cheer went up. It was loud and raucous. I raised a hand to quiet them. Last Christmas, I began. I stood in a very different room. I was surrounded by people who told me I was important because of what I owned. They toasted my health while waiting for me to die. They smiled at my face and laughed at my back. I paused, looking directly at the back of the room where Marcus stood. He lowered his head slightly, but he didn't look away. I learned a hard lesson that night, I continued. I learned that you can build a building with money, but you can only build a home with respect. And this company, this warehouse, this is my home. There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd. We have had a hard year. We cleaned house. We faced lawsuits. We faced doubts. But look at us now. I pointed to the banner hanging from the rafters. It showed our year-end numbers, record profits, 0 layoffs. We did this together, I said, because we stopped trying to be a fancy corporation and we went back to being a family of workers. I took a deep breath. This was the moment. The script I had written in my head 1,000 times over the last few weeks. But a family needs to grow, I said, and a father needs to know when to teach and when to trust. I looked at the piece of paper in my pocket. It wasn't a deed. It wasn't a check. It was a job offer. Marcus Carter, I called out. Please come up here. The room went deadly silent. The tension was palpable. Everyone knew the story. Everyone knew about the push. Everyone knew about the exile. They looked at Marcus. Then they looked at me. Was this a public execution? Was I going to humiliate him the way he had humiliated me? Marcus froze. I saw the fear in his eyes. He looked at the exit. For a split second, I thought he might bolt. I thought the pressure might be too much. But then Grady nudged him. Go on, kid, Grady whispered loud enough for the first few rows to hear. He called you. Marcus set his cup down. He walked down the long aisle between the tables. It was a long walk. It was the walk of the prodigal son returning not to a feast, but to judgment. He climbed the stairs to the pallet stage. He stood next to me. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at his boots. He looked older than his 40 years. The gray in his beard was visible now. His hands were clasped in front of him, calloused and rough. I turned off the microphone. I wanted this to be between us, even if 400 people were watching. Hello, Marcus, I said. Hello, Mr. Carter, he replied. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope. Do you know what this is? I asked. He shook his head. No, sir. It is a contract, I said. Marcus flinched. He thought it was a legal document, a restraining order maybe, or a repayment plan for the money Tiffany stole. I unfolded the paper. The Aurora branch is failing, I said, my voice low. It is a small satellite office, 5 trucks, 10 drivers. It is losing money. The logistics are a mess. I was going to close it down next month. Marcus looked up confused. Why are you telling me this? Because I need someone to fix it, I said. I handed him the paper. Position branch manager, location Aurora, salary. I paused. The salary is $60,000 a year, no bonuses, no company car, no expense account. And it comes with a 6-month probation period. If you turn a profit, you keep the job. If you fail, you are fired. And this time, you stay fired. Marcus stared at the paper. His hands were shaking. He looked at the salary. $60,000. It was a fraction of the $500,000 he used to pay himself. It was barely enough to rent a decent apartment in the city. But then he looked at the title. Manager. It wasn't CEO. It wasn't president. It was a working title, a grinding title. He looked at me. His eyes were swimming with tears. You are giving me a branch, he whispered. I am giving you a shovel, I corrected him. I am giving you a mess. It is going to be hard work, Marcus. You are going to have to drive the trucks yourself when the drivers call in sick. You are going to have to fix the engines when they break. You are going to have to earn the respect of 10 men who know exactly who you are and what you did. I stepped closer to him. I am not giving you the empire back, son. I am giving you a chance to build your own corner of it. Marcus looked at the contract. He traced the letters with his thumb. Why, he asked, his voice cracking. After everything, why? Because I saw you at the warehouse, I said. I saw you lift that box. And for the first time in my life, I didn't see a rich kid playing dress-up. I saw a Carter. Tears spilled over his cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. He didn't care who saw. I won't let you down, he said. His voice was fierce. I swear to you, I will turn that branch around. I will make it the best satellite we have. I know you will, I said. I held out a pen. Sign it. He took the pen. He didn't hesitate. He pressed the paper against the microphone stand and signed his name. Marcus Carter. The signature was firm. He handed the paper back to me. Thank you, he said. I turned the microphone back on. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, I want you to meet the new probationary manager of the Aurora branch. He has a lot of work to do, so don't go easy on him. There was a pause. Then Grady started clapping, then the mechanics, then the whole room. It wasn't the polite golf clap of the country club. It was the heavy rhythmic applause of working men acknowledging one of their own. Marcus stood there stunned, soaking it in. He looked at me. Go on, I said. Go celebrate. You start Monday. He nodded. He walked down the stairs. But before he disappeared into the crowd, he stopped. He looked back at me. He didn't wave. He just touched his hand to his heart. I watched him rejoin the drivers. I watched them slap him on the back. I watched him smile. The party continued. The music started up a local blues band playing Christmas carols with a heavy bass line. I walked down from the stage. My legs were tired. I walked to the front of the room where the main table was set up. It was the table for the senior staff and old-timers. There was one chair at the head of the table, the seat of honor. I stood behind it. My mind flashed back to the mansion, the velvet chair, the Persian rug. The way Robert Sterling had sat there like a king while I bled on the floor. That seat had been the cause of all the pain. It was the symbol of power, and power is a dangerous drug. I looked at the empty chair. I could sit there. I was the owner. I was the savior. It was my right. But tonight I didn't want to be the king. I just wanted to be a father. I looked around the table. Sitting near the end was old Joe, the security guard who had let me into the yard when everyone else had locked me out. He was eating his brisket quietly, his uniform cap resting on his knee. He was 80 years old. He had arthritis in both knees, but he never missed a shift. "Joe," I called out. He looked up startled. "Yes, Mr. Carter?" "Come here," I said. He limped over, looking worried. "Did I do something wrong, boss?" "No, Joe," I said. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table. "I want you to sit here." Joe's eyes went wide. "Oh, no, sir. That is your seat. That is the boss's seat. I can't sit there." "It is just a chair, Joe," I said, "and tonight it belongs to the man who has been with this company the longest. It belongs to loyalty." I gently pushed him toward the seat. "Sit down, Joe. That is an order." He sat down slowly, looking around nervously. He sank into the chair. He looked small in it, but he looked dignified. I walked to the side of the table and pulled up a metal folding chair. I placed it next to Joe. I sat down. I looked at the room. I saw Marcus laughing in the back. I saw the families eating. I saw the snow falling gently outside the warehouse windows. I picked up my plastic cup of punch. "Merry Christmas, Joe," I said. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Carter," he replied, his eyes shining. I took a sip. It was sugary and cheap. But as I looked at my son building a life and my employees sharing a meal, it tasted better than any vintage wine I had ever shattered on a marble floor. The seat was filled. The table was full. And for the first time in a long time, so was I. 5 years have passed since the night I was pushed into a wine cabinet by my own son. 5 years is a long time in the life of a man who is pushing 80. My hair has turned completely white now, matching the snow that falls on Chicago every winter. My hip still aches when it rains, a permanent reminder of the physical and emotional bruise that started this entire journey. But as I sit here on the porch of my small cottage overlooking the lake, not a mansion but a home I bought with cash, I can honestly say that I have never been happier. The silence that used to terrify me has become my friend. It is not the silence of loneliness anymore. It is the silence of peace. It is the silence of a man who knows that his work is done and that his legacy is secure. I retired officially last month. I mean, really retired this time. No more secret audits, no more shadowing the board meetings. I handed over the keys to the office, the codes to the safe, and the weight of the crown. And I handed them to Marcus. He didn't get the job because his last name is Carter. He got the job because for the last 5 years he has been the hardest working man in the logistics industry. He took the Aurora branch, a failing satellite office drowning in debt, and turned it into the most profitable division in the state. He did it not by firing people but by listening to them. He drove the trucks when the drivers were sick. He fixed the engines when the mechanics were swamped. He learned the name of every single employee's spouse and children. I remember the day the board voted to appoint him CEO. I abstained from the vote. I wanted there to be no doubt, no nepotism, just merit. The vote was unanimous. When he walked into my office to accept the position, he didn't look like the boy who used to wear Italian suits to impress his friends. He was wearing work boots and a blazer that looked like it had seen actual work. His hands were rough. His eyes were lined with the wisdom that only comes from failure and redemption. We shook hands. It wasn't the handshake of a father indulging a child. It was the handshake of two men who have been to war together and survived. He is not my subordinate anymore. He is my partner, and in many ways, he is my superior. He understands the modern world in a way I never could, but he navigates it with the old world values I beat into him. We meet for dinner every Sunday. We don't go to 5-star restaurants. We go to the same barbecue shack on 35th Street. We eat ribs. We talk about the business. We talk about the scholarship fund. Oh, the scholarship fund. That is the other joy of my twilight years. The Martha Carter Scholarship Fund has sent 50 kids to college so far. 50 young men and women from the South Side who had nothing but grit and a dream. Last week was the graduation ceremony for our first class of scholars. Marcus stood next to me on the stage. I watched him shake the hands of those young graduates. I saw him tear up when a young girl who is now an engineer thanked him for giving her a chance. I looked at my son, and I realized that the parasite was gone. The entitlement was gone. The hole inside him that he used to try to fill with money and Tiffany's approval had been filled with purpose. We don't talk about Tiffany much. She is a ghost of a past life. I heard she moved to New York looking for another wealthy host. I heard she is still chasing the illusion of happiness in department stores and cocktail parties. I don't wish her ill, I just don't think about her at all. As for Robert Sterling, he died in a federal prison hospital 2 years ago alone and penniless. His legacy was a cautionary tale. My legacy is standing next to me. People ask me sometimes if I regret it. They ask if I regret the harshness. They ask if I regret the eviction, the public humiliation, the years of estrangement. They say, Winston, wasn't it too cruel? Couldn't you have been gentler? And I look them in the eye and I say, no. Surgery is painful. Cutting out a tumor involves blood and scars. But if you don't cut it out, the patient dies. If I had been gentle, Marcus would still be a child trapped in a man's body. He would be broke spiritually, if not financially. He would be married to a woman who despised him, pretending to be someone he wasn't. I broke his heart to save his soul. And now, when he looks at me, there is no resentment. There is only respect. Yesterday, he came by the cottage to help me fix a loose step on the porch. I told him I could hire someone, but he insisted. He got down on his knees with a drill and a hammer. I sat in my rocking chair and watched him. He looked up at me, wiping sweat from his forehead. You know, Dad, he said. I was thinking about the Christmas party, the one 5 years ago. I tensed up. We rarely spoke of that specific night. I was thinking, he continued, that it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I looked at him surprised. You pushed me into a wine cabinet, Marcus, I said dryly. It wasn't exactly a highlight reel moment. He laughed. A deep, genuine laugh. No, it wasn't. But when you locked that door, when you forced me to sit in that cold car, you gave me back my life. You stopped me from becoming Robert. You stopped me from becoming a fraud. He stood up and tested the step. It was solid. I realized something, Dad, he said, looking out at the lake. You can't inherit a seat at the table. You can sit in the chair, but if you didn't build it, you are just a guest. Now I feel like I own the chair. I smiled. You do own it, son, I said. You built it plank by plank. He walked over and kissed me on the forehead. It was a tender gesture, something he never would have done in his flashy days. I love you, Dad, he said. I love you too, Marcus. He got in his truck, a Ford F-150 just like mine, and drove away to run the empire. I sat there as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. I thought about all the parents who enable their children, who protect them from every bump in the road, who give them everything except the tools to survive. They think they are being kind, but they are really just feeding the weakness. I am old now, my time is coming to an end, but I am not afraid. I am leaving this world better than I found it. My trucks are running, my people are paid, my scholars are graduating, and my son is a man. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind in the trees. It sounded like applause. Not the polite applause of a gala, but the thunderous applause of a life well lived. We often spend our lives building castles for our children, hoping they will live like kings and queens. But in doing so, we sometimes forget to teach them how to lay the bricks themselves. My love for Marcus was blind until his betrayal opened my eyes. I realized that the greatest inheritance isn't a loaded bank account or a mansion on the hill. It's the weight of responsibility and the dignity of earning your own seat at the table. A chair given is easily taken, but a chair earned is yours forever. Respect isn't a gift, it's a debt paid daily. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience, justice, and the power of truth. Let me know in the comments below, have you ever had to practice tough love to save someone you cared about? I read every comment, and I would love to hear your story. Until next time, keep building your own table.